The lawyer's letter arrived on a Tuesday, forwarded 3 times before finally reaching Cara Bellmont in the cramped studio apartment she could barely afford in Denver. The envelope was thick, official, the kind that usually meant bad news. She'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, coffee going cold in her hand, before she finally worked up the courage to open it. Dear Ms. Bellmont, regarding the estate of your grandfather, Heinrich Bellmont, deceased September 3rd, as per the terms of his last will and testament, you're the sole beneficiary of his property located at 1247 Ridgeline Road, Silverpoint, Colorado. The property consists of 1 residential structure, cabin, approximate 800 square feet, and 1 workshop structure, approximate 1,200 square feet, plus 2.5 acres of mountain land. Please contact this office at your earliest convenience to finalize the transfer. Property taxes are current through December. There are specific conditions attached to the workshop structure that we need to discuss in person. Sincerely, Gerald Hawthorne, attorney at law. Cara read it 3 times before the words actually penetrated. Grandpa Hank was dead, and he'd left her everything. She hadn't seen him in 15 years. Not since she was 22 and stupid and angry, when she'd screamed at him that his old-fashioned ideas and his obsession with doing things right had driven everyone away, that he was the reason her mother had left Silverpoint and never looked back, that he was impossible and stubborn, and she was done trying to make him understand the modern world. She'd said a lot of things she regretted, and then she'd left, and he'd never called, and she'd been too proud to reach out first. 15 years of silence, broken only by the occasional birthday card in precise, angular handwriting. Cards she'd barely glanced at before tucking them away, telling herself she'd respond later, knowing she never would. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story is touching you already, make sure you're subscribed. I've got something extra special saved for tomorrow. Now he was gone, and apparently, despite everything, despite the fight and the silence and the years of distance, he'd left her his property for $1, according to the letter, the symbolic amount that made it a legal sale rather than a gift. Cara looked around her apartment. Studio was a generous term. It was barely 300 square feet, with a hot plate instead of a stove, a bathroom so small you had to stand in the shower to close the door, and a Murphy bed that jammed every 3rd time she tried to fold it up. She'd been living here for 8 months. Ever since the divorce was finalized and Marcus got to keep the house they bought together because he was the one with the steady job, and she was the one who'd thrown away a perfectly good career in marketing to chase some fantasy about being an artist. The art career hadn't panned out. Turned out that being good at sketching in your spare time didn't automatically translate into being able to make a living as an illustrator, and the freelance work she'd managed to scrape together barely covered rent, much less food or utilities or the student loans that kept piling up interest. She was 37 years old, divorced, broke, and living in a space smaller than most people's walk-in closets. She had nothing keeping her in Denver. No job, no relationship, no friends who wouldn't eventually drift away when they realized she couldn't afford to go out anymore. And now she had a cabin and a workshop in the mountains. In Silverpoint, the town she'd sworn she'd never return to. Cara picked up her phone and dialed the lawyer's number before she could talk herself out of it. The drive to Silverpoint took 4 hours, winding through high country that grew progressively more remote. Cara had forgotten how beautiful it was up here. October had painted the aspens gold and orange, brilliant against the deep green of the pines. The mountains rose sharp and imposing on all sides, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Silverpoint sat at 9,500 feet, a former mining town that had briefly boomed in the 1880s before the silver played out. Now it was home to maybe 300 year-round residents, most of them either wealthy retirees with second homes or locals who'd been here for generations and wouldn't leave even if someone paid them. The town looked exactly as Cara remembered it. One main street with a general store, a post office, a combination diner and gas station, and a handful of other businesses barely hanging on. The elementary school was still there, though she'd heard they consolidated with the next town over for middle and high school. The old mining museum looked more weathered than she remembered. Its sign faded almost to illegibility. She drove through town without stopping, following the directions the lawyer had given her. Ridgeline Road climbed steeply out of the valley, switchbacking up the mountain until the pavement gave way to graded dirt. The road was rough but passable, though her aging Honda protested every bump and rut. After 3 miles, she found a mailbox. It was handcrafted from copper, weathered to a deep patina, with Bellmont stamped into the metal in precise letters. Even the mailbox was Grandpa Hank's work. Of course it was. The driveway was overgrown, branches scraping both sides of her car as she crept forward. After a quarter mile, the trees opened up into a clearing, and there it was. The cabin was small but solid, built from logs that had darkened with age and weather. The roof was metal, showing patches of rust but no obvious holes. A covered porch wrapped around the front, and Cara could see her grandfather's rocking chair still sitting there, as if he might come out any moment and settle into it with his pipe and his newspaper. But it was a workshop that made her breath catch. It was larger than the cabin, built from the same weathered logs but with more industrial feel. Tall windows lined the north wall, and a massive sliding door dominated the front. But what struck her most was a heavy chain wrapped around the door handles, secure with a padlock the size of her fist. And below the lock, nailed directly to the wood, was a hand-lettered sign in Grandpa Hank's unmistakable handwriting. Do not open until Cara arrives. No exceptions. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. H. Bellmont, August 2024. August. He'd sealed it just a month before he died. As if he'd known. As if he'd been preparing for this. Cara climbed out her car, her legs stiff from the drive. The mountain air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from someone's chimney down the valley. At this elevation, winter came early and stayed late. She could see her breath misting in the afternoon air. She approached the workshop slowly, her footsteps loud on the gravel. The chain was new, the padlock showing no rust or weathering. The sign's ink hadn't faded. This wasn't something that had been sealed for years. This was recent, deliberate, meant specifically for her. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the key ring the lawyer had given her. There were 4 keys, 2 for the cabin. He'd said front and back door, 1 for the workshop's regular lock, and 1 for the padlock. The padlock key was brass heavy, inscribed with 3 words in Grandpa Hank's precise lettering. For when ready. Ready for what? Cara wondered, but she didn't unlock it yet. Something about the sealed workshop, the chain, the sign, made her hesitate. Whatever was inside had been important enough for her grandfather to lock it away. Important enough that he'd warned the entire town to stay out until she arrived. She needed to see the cabin first. Needed to walk through the space where Grandpa Hank had lived, to understand what he'd left behind before she opened whatever he'd sealed away. The cabin was unlocked. The front door swung open with a slight creak, revealing an interior that was surprisingly clean. Someone had been maintaining it, or Grandpa Hank had been meticulous until the very end. Probably both. The main room was open concept before that was a trendy term. Kitchen along one wall. Living area with a stone fireplace dominating another, a sturdy wooden table and chairs in between. Everything was handmade. The cabinets, the table, the chairs, the shelves, all bore the marks of Grandpa Hank's craftsmanship. Dovetailed joints, perfectly flush surfaces, that had been sanded and oiled until it glowed. 2 doors led off the main room. One to a small bedroom with a bed frame that Grandpa Hank had obviously built. The mattress strip bare, but the frame itself a work of art. Walnut, maybe, or cherry, with inlaid details that would have cost thousands if you tried to buy something similar. The other door led to a bathroom that was basic but functional. The fixtures were old but well-maintained, the tile work showing Grandpa Hank's signature precision. Cara walked back to the main room and stood before the fireplace. The mantel held a collection of photographs in frames that Grandpa Hank had made himself. She recognized some of them. Her grandmother, dead before Cara was born, smiling in a wedding photo from 1960-something. Her mother as a child, looking uncomfortable in a stiff dress. A teenage version of her mother, rebellious even in a still image, arms crossed and expression defiant. And then Cara herself. School pictures from elementary years, before the family had fragmented. There were later photos, too. One she didn't remember being taken. Her college graduation, Grandpa Hank must have been there in the audience, even though she couldn't recall seeing him. Her wedding to Marcus, where she was pretty sure he hadn't been invited. The last photo was the most recent. Cara at maybe 35, walking down a Denver street, completely unaware she was being photographed. She looked tired in it, worn down. It must have been taken before the divorce was finalized, during those awful months when she was still trying to pretend everything was fine. How had he gotten this photo? Had he come to Denver, walked her neighborhood, taken pictures without her knowledge? The thought should have been creepy, but instead it made her throat tight. He'd been keeping track of her, watching over her, even when she'd shut him out. On the mantel beside the photos was a sealed envelope with her name on it. Her hand shook as she picked it up. Inside was a letter, dated September 1st, 2 days before he died. Cara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've made it to Silverpoint. I wasn't sure you would come. Wouldn't have blamed you if you didn't after everything. But I hoped. I always hoped. I don't have much time left. The doctors give me days, maybe a week. Cancer, in case you're wondering. Lungs, which is ironic for someone who spent his whole life working in clean mountain air. But I guess all those years working with metal dust and chemical finishes caught up with me. I've sealed the workshop. You'll see the chain on the door. There are things inside that I need you to find. Things you need to understand before the vultures descend. And they will descend, Cara. The moment word gets out about what's in that workshop, people will come. Some meaning well, some not. I know you think I'm just a stubborn old man who never moved past 1975. Your mother thought the same thing, which is why she left and never came back. But there's a reason I held on to the old ways, a reason I insisted on doing everything by hand, everything precise. That workshop holds 45 years of work, 45 years of innovation that nobody knows about because I kept it secret. Why secret? Because I learned the hard way what happens when you share your innovations before they're protected. Because I watch better men than me get their life's work stolen. Because I decided that if I couldn't trust the system, I'd keep everything to myself until the timing was right. The timing is right now. Cara, you're an artist. You understand the value of craftsmanship, even if you convince yourself it wouldn't pay the bills. You've got your grandmother's eye for detail and my stubbornness. You're exactly the person I need to finish what I started. In the workshop, you'll find my life's work. Tools, yes, but also plans, prototypes, innovations in precision machining that the industry doesn't know exists yet. Some of it's worth money, a lot of money, if you know how to leverage it properly. But more than that, it's knowledge. 45 years of solving problems that nobody else bothered to solve because the solutions weren't profitable enough for corporations. There's a hidden compartment in the main workbench. Find it. Inside, you'll find documentation for everything. Patents I filed but never announced, technical drawings, test results. Everything you need to prove that the innovations are mine and mine alone. I know this is a lot to ask. You probably came here expecting to find a rundown cabin and a workshop full of rusty tools. You probably plan to sell it all and use the money to get back on your feet. And if that's what you decide to do, I won't haunt you for it. This is yours now. Do what you think is right. But if you're willing, if you're ready, there's something bigger here. A chance to take craftsmanship that the world has forgotten and show them what it's worth. A chance to build something that matters. The key to the workshop opens more than just a door, Cara. It opens possibilities. But only if you're brave enough to walk through. I'm proud of you. I always have been, even when you were too angry to hear it. And I'm sorry I wasn't better at showing it. Your grandfather, Hank. Cara read the letter 3 times, tears blurring her vision by the end. She'd spent 15 years convinced that he'd written her off, that he'd been too stubborn and too stuck in his ways to forgive her for leaving. But he'd kept her photos on his mantle. He'd watched over her from a distance. And in the end, he'd trusted her with everything he'd built. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Outside, the sun was dropping toward the peaks, casting long shadows across the clearing. She should wait until morning to open the workshop. Should go through the cabin more thoroughly, maybe drive back to town and find a place to stay tonight. Come back tomorrow with a clear head and better light. But she could feel the weight of the brass key in her pocket. could feel 45 years of secrets waiting behind that chained door, and she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep without knowing what Grandpa Hank had hidden away. Cara grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Of course, Grandpa Hank had left supplies, and walked back outside. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees now that the sun was behind the mountains. She should have brought a heavier jacket, but she was too focused on the workshop to care about the cold. The padlock was heavy in her hand when she lifted it. The key slid in smoothly, and the lock opened with a solid click that echoed across the clearing. She unwound the chain, letting it coil at her feet with a metallic rattle that sounded unnaturally loud in the mountain silence. Her hand was on the door handle when she heard a voice behind her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Section 2, the catalyst inciting incident. Cara spun around, heart hammering. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, hands in the pockets of a worn Carhartt jacket. He was maybe 50, weathered in the way mountain people got, with gray threading through dark hair and a face that had seen a lot of sun and wind. "Who are you?" Cara demanded, her hand tightening on the flashlight like it might be useful as a weapon. "Name's Daniel Cortez. I live about 2 miles down the mountain." He gestured vaguely in that direction. "Was friends with your grandfather. Heard you might be coming up here. You were watching for me?" "Not watching, just paying attention." Daniel took a few steps closer, his movements careful, non-threatening. "Hank asked me to keep an eye on the place after he passed. Made me promise not to let anyone else open that workshop before you got here. Why would anyone else try?" Daniel's expression grew serious. "You really don't know what's in there, do you?" "My grandfather's tools and innovations, apparently." That's what his letter said. Innovations. Daniel almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. "That's one way to put it. Look, Miss Bellmont." Cara, then your grandfather was brilliant. Like, actually brilliant. Not just good at what he did. He solved problems in precision engineering that companies spend millions trying to solve. And he did it alone in that workshop with tools he made himself. Okay, but why does that mean someone would try to break in? Because 3 weeks before Hank died, someone offered him $2 million for the contents of his workshop. Cash. No questions asked, no inspection required. $2 million for whatever was inside. Cara felt her stomach drop. Who? Company called Vertex Precision Engineering. They're a manufacturing conglomerate. Big contracts with aerospace and medical device companies. Their rep showed up here with a check already written out. Just needed Hank's signature. And he refused? Threw the guy off his property. Literally. Hank was sick, but he was still strong enough to grab that corporate shark by his expensive suit and physically escort him to his car. Daniel's smile was genuine this time. It was something to see. But why would they offer that much if they didn't even know what was inside? Because they knew enough. Somehow they'd found out about some patent applications Hank filed years ago. Applications for precision bearing systems, micro-adjustment mechanisms, things that would revolutionize manufacturing if they worked at scale. The applications never went anywhere. Hank withdrew them before they were approved. But the technical drawings were on file, and someone at Vertex must have stumbled across them. Cara's mind was racing. $2 million for tools and patents, for innovations that her grandfather had developed alone and kept secret. "So when I open this workshop," she said slowly, "Vertex is going to come back." Vertex and probably others. Word's gotten around that Hank passed and left everything to his granddaughter. A granddaughter who, no offense, doesn't have any background in engineering or manufacturing. "How do you know that?" "Small town. People talk. And Hank talked about you sometimes, when he'd had a beer or two. Told me you were an artist who married some marketing guy in Denver. Said you had an eye for detail, but no patience for technical work." That stung, probably because it was accurate. "What else did he say about me?" Daniel studied her for a moment. "That you were too much like him for your own good. Stubborn, principled, that you'd rather fail at something meaningful than succeed at something that didn't matter." He said that. His exact words were, she walked away from a comfortable life because she couldn't stand being fake anymore. Just like I walked away from a lucrative partnership because I couldn't stand working with thieves. He respected that, even if it broke his heart, that you never came back. Cara felt tears threatening again and pushed them down. She'd deal with her feelings about Grandpa Hank later. Right now, she needed to understand what she was dealing with. This partnership he walked away from. She said, "What happened?" Daniel glanced at the workshop, then back at her. "That's a long story. You should probably see what's inside first. Then I can help you understand the context. But it's safe to open? Nobody's going to jump out and try to steal anything. Not tonight. But you should know that once you open that door, things are going to move fast. People are going to find out. And you're going to have to make some hard decisions about what to do with what's inside." Cara looked at the workshop door, at the chain coiled on the ground, at the padlock hanging open in her hand. She thought about Grandpa Hank's letter, about 45 years of work, about innovations worth millions of dollars sitting behind a door that only she had the key to. "Are you trying to warn me off?" she asked Daniel. "Trying to convince me not to open it?" "No, I'm trying to prepare you. There's a difference." He pulled something from his pocket and held it out. "Hank gave me this before he died. Said to give it to you after you'd read his letter, but before you open the workshop." It was another envelope, smaller than the first, with a single word written on it in Grandpa Hank's handwriting. Context. Cara took it, her fingers numb from cold and adrenaline. She opened it carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, dated March 15th, 1979. The headline read, "Local machinist accuses partner of patent theft." Below it was a photo of a younger Grandpa Hank, maybe 40 years old, standing outside what looked like a different workshop. He was pointing at something off camera, his expression angry and determined. The article was brief. Heinrich Bellmont, co-founder of Bellmont Krause Precision Tools, has filed a lawsuit against his business partner, Robert Krause, alleging theft of intellectual property. Bellmont claims that Krause filed patents for several innovations in precision bearing systems under his own name, despite the designs being collaborative work. Krause denies the allegations and has countersued for defamation. The case is expected to go to trial next year. Cara looked up at Daniel. "What happened?" "The trial never happened. Krause had better lawyers, more money. He tied everything up in motions and depositions until Hank ran out of funds to fight. Eventually, Hank was forced to settle, which meant withdrawing his lawsuit, signing an NDA, and giving up any claim to the patents or the company. So Krause got away with it. More than that, Krause built Bellmont Krause into a major player in the precision tools market, sold it to a larger company in the 90s for something like $20 million, used designs that were at least partially your grandfather's work, and Hank never saw a dime. Jesus. Yeah, so when Hank walked away from that partnership, he didn't just lose his business. He lost his life's work up to that point, his reputation in the industry, and his faith in the system. That's why he came up here to Silverpoint, built this workshop, and started over completely alone. And that's why he kept everything secret. He wasn't paranoid. He was cautious, based on experience. Cara folded the newspaper clipping carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. She understood now why Grandpa Hank had sealed the workshop, why he'd left such stern warnings, why he trusted only her to open it. He'd been betrayed once. He wasn't going to let his work be stolen twice. "Okay," she said, turning back to the workshop door. "Let's see what 45 years of secret innovation looks like." She pulled the door open. Section 3. The first reveal mystery deepens. The last rays of sunset streamed to the tall north-facing windows, illuminating the workshop in golden light. Cara stepped inside, her breath catching at the sheer scope of what her grandfather had created. The space was cathedral-like in its organization and precision. Every surface gleamed. Every tool hung in its designated place. The walls were lined with pegboards showing the painted outlines of tools, hammers, wrenches, measuring instruments, so that each one could be returned to exactly where it belonged. The floor was clean-swept concrete, stained from years of work, but showing no clutter, no debris. The main workbench dominated the center of the room. It was massive, at least 12 feet long and 4 feet deep, Built from what looked like maple or beech, the surface worn smooth from decades of use but still flat and true. Precision measuring tools lined one edge. A massive vise was bolted at one corner, and mounted above the bench, on a carefully constructed framework, was a collection of magnifying lenses and articulated lights that could be positioned exactly where needed. But it was a machine that made Cara's jaw drop. A lathe stood along one wall, but not like any lathe she'd seen in shop class. This one looked almost organic, with flowing curves and perfect balance. The metal gleamed, showing no rust, every bearing and adjustment knob precisely positioned. Beside it, a milling machine that looked more like a sculpture than a tool. The base was hand-cast. She could see Grandpa Hank's mark on it, and the moving parts were so perfectly fitted that they seemed to float rather than slide. A drill press, a grinder, a set of precision measurement tools that belonged in a laboratory rather than a mountain workshop. All of it hand-built, all of it maintained to a standard that would make professional machinists weep with envy. Daniel had followed her inside and now stood just past the threshold, watching her reaction. Impressive, isn't it? He made all of this? Every piece. Some of it's rebuilt from salvaged equipment, but most of it he fabricated from scratch. That lathe took him 3 years. The milling machine was 5. He'd work on them in between paying jobs, adjusting and refining until they met his standards. Cara walked slowly through the space, her artist's eye drinking in the details. This wasn't just functional, it was beautiful. The tools were works of art in themselves, designed not just to perform tasks, but to perform them with elegance and precision. She reached the back wall where filing cabinets stood in a neat row. Each drawer was labeled in Grandpa Hank's precise handwriting: bearing systems, micro-adjustment mechanisms, precision gearing, temperature compensation, vibration damping. "Can I?" she asked Daniel, gesturing to the cabinets. "It's yours. All of it." She opened the first drawer. Inside were folders, each one meticulously organized. Technical drawings on translucent paper, the kind architects used. Calculations in Grandpa Hank's handwriting, showing force distributions and material stresses. Photographs of prototypes, each one labeled with dates and performance notes. The scope of it was overwhelming. This wasn't just a hobby or a passion project. This was a research program that would have cost millions if a university or corporation had undertaken it. And Grandpa Hank had done alone, funding it with whatever work he could get, slowly building a library of innovations that nobody knew existed. "The hidden compartment," Cara said suddenly, remembering the letter. He said there's a hidden compartment in the main workbench. Daniel nodded. "I helped him build it. Actually, about 6 months ago, when he knew he was getting sicker. He wanted to make sure the most important stuff was protected." They walked back to the main bench. Daniel knelt and reached underneath, his fingers searching for something. There was a soft click, and a section of the bench's side panels swung open on hidden hinges. Inside was a fireproof safe, the kind you'd find in a home office, about 2 feet square. The combination lock on the front bore a small brass plate with an engraved note: "Your birthday, Cara's birthday." Of course. She spun the dial, month, day, year, and heard the lock click open. Inside the safe were 3 items. First, a leather-bound journal, thick and heavy, the cover worn soft from years of handling. She pulled it out and opened it carefully. Grandpa Hank's handwriting filled every page, dense and precise, with technical sketches in the margins. The first entry was dated June 1979, just months after the newspaper article about the lawsuit. "I've decided to start over completely." The entry read, "Robert Krauss taught me that the system doesn't protect innovation. It protects money and connections. If I want my work to matter, to actually be used rather than stolen and corrupted, I need to do it differently. I need to keep it secret until I'm ready to release it on my own terms." The journal went on for hundreds of pages, documenting every innovation, every breakthrough, every solution to problems that Grandpa Hank had identified in precision manufacturing. It was a masterwork of engineering documentation, the kind of thing that PhD students would study for decades. The second item was a thick folder labeled patents, ready to file. Inside were applications for 17 different innovations, all fully documented, all ready to be submitted to the patent office. But these weren't the applications that Grandpa Hank had filed and withdrawn decades ago. These were new, updated versions, refined over years of development. And the third item made Cara's hands shake when she pulled it out. It was a USB drive in a small padded case. Attached to it was a note in Grandpa Hank's handwriting. Video documentation of every prototype, proof of conception dates, independent verification from D, Cortez, and 3 other witnesses. Everything needed to prove these innovations are mine and mine alone. Upload this to multiple secure locations before you do anything else. You verified his work? Cara asked Daniel. He asked me to witness the operation of certain prototypes, to document their performance on camera with time stamps. I'm not an engineer, but I can verify that on specific dates, certain devices perform specific functions. That's enough to establish proof of conception if anyone tries to claim he stole the ideas. Cara sat down on the floor, the USB drive in one hand, the patent folder in the other. The weight of what she was holding was almost physical. This wasn't just her grandfather's legacy. This was a fortune, if she knew how to leverage it properly. These innovations, properly protected and marketed, could be worth tens of millions. But more than that, it was vindication. Proof that Grandpa Hank hadn't just been a stubborn old man clinging to outdated methods. He'd been innovating at a level that professional engineering firms hadn't matched. And he'd done it alone, out of spite and determination, and a refusal to let theft define his legacy. "There's something else you should know," Daniel said quietly. He pulled his phone from his pocket and showed her a text message dated this morning. "I got this from a friend who works at the county clerk's office." The message read, 3 different companies file requests for property records on Hank Bellmont's land today. Vertex Precision, Krause Industries, and someone called Titan Manufacturing. They're circling. Cara felt ice in her stomach. Krause Industries? As in Robert Krause. His son runs it now. But yeah, same company that screwed your grandfather 45 years ago. Seems they've heard that Hank's work might be available, and they want first crack at it. How did they even find out he died? Death certificates are public record. Anyone paying attention would know. And I guarantee that Vertex, at least, has been monitoring for exactly that. They know the workshop is sealed. They're just waiting to see who opens it and what happens next. Cara stood up, clutching the USB drive like a lifeline. Her mind was spinning with implications. If she filed these patents, the companies would fight her. They'd claim the innovations weren't original, or that Grandpa Hank had stolen them, or that she didn't have the right to file on his behalf. They'd tie her up in legal battles that would drain whatever money she had left. But if she didn't file them, if she tried to sell the workshop contents without legal protection, those same companies would reverse engineer everything and patent it themselves. She'd get nothing, and Grandpa Hank's work would be stolen all over again. She needed help, real help, from people who understood patent law and corporate warfare. But who could she trust? Daniel seemed honest, but he'd admitted he was an engineer. The lawyer, Hawthorne, had just been handling the estate transfer. She had no idea if he could handle something this complex. And underneath all the practical concerns was a deeper question. What did she want to do with this? Her grandfather had spent 45 years building this body of work. He'd sacrificed relationships, comfort, recognition. He'd died alone on this mountain, with innovations worth millions locked away in a sealed workshop, trusting that she, the granddaughter who hadn't spoken to him in 15 years, would know what to do with it. "I need time to think," Cara said finally. Can you not tell me when I'm here yet? I need to figure out my next move before word gets out." Daniel nodded. "I won't say anything. But Cara, people already know, the lawyer had to file paperwork transferring the deed. Anyone monitoring property records would see that. You probably have a few days before the vultures show up in person, but not much more than that. Then I'll work fast." She looked around the workshop, at 45 years of secret innovation, at the tools and machines and documentation that represented her grandfather's life work. "He trusted me with this. I'm not going to let him down." After Daniel left, promising to check in tomorrow, Cara spent the next 3 hours going through the workshop systematically. She photographed everything: the tools, the machines, the filing cabinets full of technical drawings. She carefully packed a journal, the patent applications, and a USB drive into her backpack, making sure they were secure. In one corner of the workshop, she found something that made her throat tighten. A small desk, different from the work tables, with a simple wooden chair. On the desk was a framed photograph of her as a child, maybe 8 years old, covered in sawdust and grinning, as she held up something she'd made, a small wooden box with dovetail joints that Grandpa Hank must have taught her how to cut. She didn't remember that day, not clearly, but the photo captured something purer. A little girl who loved making things, who wasn't afraid of tools or complexity, who found joy in precision and craftsmanship. When had she lost that? When had she convinced herself that making things didn't matter, that art wasn't valuable, that the only measure of success was a steady paycheck and a comfortable life? Beside the photograph was another envelope, this one unsealed. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words in Grandpa Hank's handwriting. Remember who you were. Cara slept in the cabin that night, wrapped in blankets she found in the bedroom closet. The bed frame was too perfect to leave bare, so she brought in the sleeping bag from her car and made do. The cabin had no heat beyond the fireplace, and she didn't know how to work the propane system yet. So she just piled on layers and tried not to think about how cold it would get once winter arrived in earnest. She dreamed of the workshop, of machines running with perfect precision, of her grandfather's hands guiding hers on a tool she couldn't quite see. In the dream, he was trying to tell her something important, but the words were drowned out by the sound of machines. She woke before dawn to the sound of vehicles coming up the driveway. Cara rolled out of bed, her heart racing. Through the cabin's front window, she could see headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness, bouncing as the vehicles navigated the rutted driveway. 2 trucks and a sedan. None of them were Daniel's beat-up Ford. She grabbed her phone, no service this far up the mountain, of course, and quickly got dressed. She had maybe 2 minutes before they reached the clearing, the USB drive. She'd left it in her backpack, which was still in the workshop where she'd been organizing documentation last night. Stupid. She should have brought it inside, should have hidden it somewhere safe. The vehicles pulled into the clearing, their headlights sweeping across the cabin and workshop. Cara stepped onto the porch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold, trying to look confused and sleepy rather than terrified. 3 people emerged from the vehicles. 2 men from the trucks, both wearing jeans and work boots, looking like local contractors, and a woman from the sedan, wearing a business suit that was completely impractical for mountain living and heels that sank into the gravel with each step. "Ms. Bellmont," the woman called out, picking her way toward the porch. "I'm Jennifer Marsh, VP of Acquisitions for Vertex Precision Engineering. I apologize for the early hour, but I was hoping we could talk." "About?" Cara kept her voice neutral, though her mind was racing. How had they gotten here so fast? Had they been waiting somewhere nearby, watching for signs of activity? About the contents of that workshop. Jennifer gestured to the building, her smile professional but not reaching her eyes. "We made an offer to your grandfather before he passed. He declined, but perhaps you'll be more receptive to hearing what we have to propose. My grandfather just died. I've barely had time to look at what he left me. I'm not making any decisions about selling anything." Of course. We're not here to pressure you." Jennifer's tone was soothing, patronizing. "We just want to make sure you understand the value of what you've inherited. Your grandfather was brilliant, but he wasn't a businessman. We can help you maximize the value of his work by buying it from me for less than it's worth." Jennifer's smile tightened slightly. "We're prepared to be very generous. Much more generous than our initial offer to your grandfather. We understand the workshop contains not just tools, but also documentation for certain innovations. We're willing to pay for everything. $5 million cash, transferred today. $5 million. More than double what they'd offered Grandpa Hank. They must have found out what was in those patent applications. Must have done enough research to understand the value. That's a lot of money," Cara said carefully. "It is, and is a fair offer for what's essentially a collection of prototypes and drawings." "Yes, Your grandfather was skilled, but taking innovation from prototype to market requires resources that you don't have. Legal protection, manufacturing partnerships, distribution networks. We can handle all of that for $5 million, plus ongoing royalties, if you prefer. We can structure this however makes you most comfortable. Jennifer took another step toward the porch. The important thing is that your grandfather's work gets out into the world where it can make a difference. Isn't that what he would have wanted? Cara thought about the letter, about Grandpa Hank's warning that vultures would come, thought about how he'd refuse Vertex's offer even when he was dying, even when $2 million would have been life-changing. He'd refuse because he knew something she was only beginning to understand. The work was worth more than money. It was worth recognition, worth having his name attached to innovations that would change the industry, worth knowing that his ideas couldn't be stolen and repackaged as someone else's success. I need time to think about it, Cara said. Of course. Take all the time you need. Jennifer pulled a business card from her pocket and held it out. Just don't wait too long. Other companies have heard about your grandfather's work. The longer you wait, the more complicated this will get. It sounded like a warning. Maybe it was. Or maybe Jennifer was just playing the same game that Robert Kraus had played 45 years ago, using pressure and intimidation to make someone doubt themselves enough to take a bad deal. After they left, Cara sat on the porch steps and watched the sun rise over the mountains. The valley below was still in shadow, but the peaks glowed pink and gold. It was beautiful up here. Isolated, cold, unforgiving, but beautiful. Her phone buzzed. She'd gotten just enough signal for a text to come through. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Bellmont, heard about your inheritance. I'm an attorney specializing in patent law and intellectual property. Would like to discuss protecting your grandfather's work. No charge for initial consultation. Call me when you're ready. Sarah Chun. How had an attorney gotten her number? The lawyer handling the estate, probably, which meant word was spreading fast through professional networks. Soon every patent attorney and corporate acquisition team in the region would know about Grandpa Hank's workshop. Cara needed to move faster than they expected, needed to get ahead of this before she lost control entirely. She went back into the workshop and retrieved her backpack with a USB drive and patent applications. Then she carefully locked both the workshop and cabin, got in her car, and headed back down the mountain toward town. She had work to do. Part 2. The investigation begins. Section 4. Pursuing the Truth investigation begins. The Silverpoint Public Library was a small brick building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Cara had spent countless hours here as a child, hiding in the stacks when her mother and grandfather were fighting, losing herself in books about faraway places and lives different from the complicated ones she was living. The librarian was new. Cara didn't recognize her, but she was helpful when Cara explained she needed to use a computer with internet. We've got 3 public terminals, the woman said, pointing to a corner desk. You get 2 hours at a time, but nobody's using them right now, so you can probably stay longer if you need. Cara settled the computer and pulled out the USB drive. First priority, backup copies. She created accounts on 3 different cloud storage services using email addresses she made up on the spot, then uploaded the video documentation to all 3. The files were massive, hours of footage showing Grandpa Hank's prototypes in operation, each one time-stamped and verified by Daniel and the other witnesses. While the uploads processed, she researched patent law. The process was more complicated than she'd expected. Filing a patent required not just documenting the invention, but also proving it was novel, non-obvious, and useful. You needed detailed technical drawings, claims about what the invention did, and explanations of how it was different from existing technology. Grandpa Hank had done all of that work already. The patent applications in her backpack were complete, professional-quality documents that would stand up to scrutiny. But filing them meant putting her name or his name, posthumously, on public record as an inventor. Once filed, the applications would be visible to anyone searching patent databases. The corporations circling would know exactly what she had. They'd be able to prepare counterclaims, search for prior art, build cases for why the patent should be rejected, and more importantly, they know exactly how valuable Grandpa Hank's innovations were. Cara read through patent attorneys' websites, trying to understand the process. Most of them charge hundreds of dollars per hour, with total costs for filing a single patent running anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. Grandpa Hank had 17 patents ready to file. Even at the low end, that was $85,000 in legal fees, money she didn't have. She pulled up her bank account on the library computer. Balance, $847.32. That was supposed to last her through the end of the month for food, gas, and whatever else she needed. Her credit cards were maxed out from the divorce, and a year of failed freelancing afterward. She had no savings, no assets beyond her aging car, no one she could borrow from. The text from Sarah Chun, the patent attorney, was starting to look more appealing. No charge for initial consultation. Probably meant she'd try to sign Cara up as a client, but at least Cara could get professional advice about what she was dealing with. She called the number. Sarah Chun answered on the second ring. Ms. Bellmont, thank you for calling. I know this must be an overwhelming time. You could say that. Cara kept her voice low, aware that the library was public and anyone could be listening. How did you find out about my grandfather's work? Patent attorneys have networks, just like any other profession. When your grandfather withdrew those early applications in the 80s, several of us noticed. The technical drawings were remarkable, clearly the work of someone who understood precision engineering at a very deep level. We kept an eye on him over the years, hoping he might file something new. You were watching him? Not watching. Just paying attention to someone who had talent. When I heard he'd passed and left everything to you, I thought you might benefit from some guidance. Sarah's tone was matter-of-fact, professional. I'm not here to pressure you into anything, but I think you should understand what you're dealing with before you make any decisions. I'm listening. Your grandfather's innovations, from what I understand, solve problems in precision manufacturing that most companies have given up trying to solve. Micro adjustments that maintain accuracy under temperature variations. Bearing systems that eliminate vibration at high speeds. These are things that would revolutionize industries, aerospace, medical devices, scientific instruments. They're worth, conservatively, $50 to $100 million in licensing fees over the next decade. Cara felt dizzy. $50 to $100 million. Not the $5 million Vertex was offering. Not even close. But, Sarah continued, realizing that value requires protection. You need patents filed and approved. You need the legal framework to defend against corporations that will try to steal or invalidate your claims. And you need someone who understands how to negotiate with companies that have armies of lawyers. And you think you're that someone. I know I am. I've been doing patent law for 20 years, specializing in protecting individual inventors against corporate theft. I've won cases against companies much larger than Vertex Precision. I know their tactics, their lawyers, their strategies. How much do you charge? There was a pause. My standard rate is $400 an hour. But for a case like this, I'd propose a different arrangement. I'll handle the patent filings, the legal defense, and the licensing negotiations on contingency. I get 20% of whatever we make from your grandfather's innovations, whether through licensing, sales, or settlements. If we don't make anything, you don't pay me 20%. That was a huge bite, but if the innovations were really worth $50 million or more, 20% was still more money than Cara could imagine. Why would you take that risk? Cara asked if the patents might not get approved or if we can't find buyers. Because I've seen your grandfather's technical drawings. I know what he was capable of. And honestly, Sarah's voice softened. Because I'm tired of seeing brilliant inventors get crushed by corporate greed. Your grandfather's story, what happened with Krauss Industries, that's not unique. It happens all the time. And I want to make sure it doesn't happen to you. Cara thought about Jennifer Marsh showing up at dawn with $5 million in cash. Thought about Grandpa Hank refusing $2 million even when he was dying. Thought about 45 years of work locked away in a mountain workshop. Because the system couldn't be trusted, I need to see the patents first, she said. Make sure I understand what I'm agreeing to protect. Of course. Can you email me scans of the applications? I'll review them and we can talk through each one. Cara glanced at the library computer. The uploads to cloud storage had finished while she was on the phone. I can scan them here and send them today. But I want to meet in person before I sign anything. Absolutely. My office is in Boulder, about 90 minutes from Silverpoint. Can you come down tomorrow? Tomorrow works. After hanging up, Cara spent the next hour scanning all 17 patent applications on the library's ancient scanner. The machine was painfully slow, but eventually she had digital copies of everything. She sent them to Sarah Chun with a brief email explaining that these were her grandfather's ready-to-file applications, complete and comprehensive. Then she started researching the companies that were circling. Vertex Precision Engineering was a mid-sized manufacturing firm with contracts in aerospace and medical devices. Just like Sarah had said, they specialized in components that required extreme precision. Parts for surgical robots, guidance systems for satellites, instruments for scientific research. Annual revenue around $200 million. Big enough to fight a patent battle. Small enough that they might actually need Grandpa Hank's innovations to compete with larger firms. Krauss Industries was bigger. Much bigger. Started by Robert Krauss after he'd pushed Grandpa Hank out of their partnership. The company had grown into a major player in precision tools and manufacturing equipment. Annual revenue over $1 billion. They'd acquired smaller companies, licensed patents, built a reputation for innovation that was probably built on stealing from people like Grandpa Hank. And then there was Titan Manufacturing, the third company that had requested property records according to Daniel's text. Cara couldn't find as much information about them. They were privately held, didn't publish annual reports. But what she could find suggested they were even bigger than Krauss Industries, with operations in 12 countries and contracts with both government agencies and major corporations. 3 predators circling, each one with more resources than she could imagine. And she was supposed to somehow protect her grandfather's work from all of them, while also figuring out how to turn innovations into money. The librarian approached Cara's desk. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here looking for you." Cara's stomach clenched. "Who?" He didn't give a name. Just said he was a friend of your grandfather's and heard you were in town. Cara closed the browser windows and pulled the USB drive from the computer. She slipped it into her pocket along with her phone and stood up carefully. "What does he look like?" "Older gentleman, maybe 65. Nice suit, expensive watch. Not from around here." "Not Daniel." Then, Daniel wore Carhartt jackets and work boots, not expensive suits. This was someone else. Someone who tracked her to the library less than 24 hours after she'd opened the workshop. "Tell him I'm not available." He said it's important. Said he knew your grandfather and has information you need. Cara hesitated. Information she needed? Or information someone wanted her to think she needed? "Where is he?" "In the reading room by the local history section." Cara made a decision. "Can you call the sheriff's office? Just let them know there's someone here making me uncomfortable. Don't send anyone yet. Just let them know." The librarian's eyes widened, but she nodded. "Of course." Cara walked toward the reading room, her heart pounding. Through the doorway, she could see a man sitting at one of the wooden tables, reading a book about Colorado mining history. He was exactly as the librarian had described. 65 or so, silver hair, suit that probably cost more than Cara's car, watch that definitely did. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "Ms. Bellmont, thank you for seeing me. I know this is sudden, but I promise I'm here as a friend. I don't know you." "No, but I knew your grandfather. My name is Thomas Krauss." The name hit her like a physical blow. Krauss, as in Robert Krauss, the partner who had stolen Grandpa Hank's work 45 years ago. "Get out." Thomas held up his hands, placating. "I understand your reaction. My father and your grandfather had a complicated history, but I'm not my father. And I'm here because I think we can help each other. I have nothing to say to you. Just hear me out. 5 minutes. If you still want me to leave after that, I will." Cara remained standing, her hand on her phone, ready to call for help if this went sideways. Talk. Thomas closed the book and set it aside. My father died 10 years ago. When I took over the company, I found his private files, documentation of everything that happened between him and your grandfather. And Ms. Bellmont, I'm here to tell you that your grandfather was right. My father stole from him. Not just ideas, actual technical drawings, test data, innovations that Hank had developed. My father filed patents under his own name, built a company on work that wasn't his. Why are you telling me this? Because I've spent the last 10 years trying to make amends for what my father did. I reorganized the company's ethics policies, established funds for inventors whose work was stolen, tried to run the business with integrity. But there's one thing I couldn't fix: what my father did to Hank Bellmont. Thomas leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know your grandfather refused to settle the lawsuit back in 1979. I know my father used legal tactics to bankrupt him, force him into silence. And I know Hank spent the rest of his life working alone because he couldn't trust anyone in the industry. That's on my father. And by extension, it's on me. So what do you want? I want to make it right. I've reviewed the patent applications your grandfather filed and withdrew in the 80s. I know he's been developing those innovations further. And I'm prepared to offer you a partnership. Not an acquisition, a partnership. Krauss Industries will fund the patent filings, provide legal defense, handle manufacturing and distribution. You retain full ownership and creative control. We just license the right to produce and sell. In exchange for 30% of net revenues. The remaining 70% goes to you. Plus, your grandfather's name goes on every patent, every product. Bellmont Precision Systems, a division of Krauss Industries, honoring the man my father wronged. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Why would you give me such a good deal? Cara asked. You could just wait for me to file the patent myself, then challenge them, tie me up in court until I run out of money. That's what your father would have done. Because I'm not my father. Thomas's voice was firm. And because companies like Vertex and Titan are going to do exactly what you just described. They're going to bury you in legal motions until you're forced to settle for pennies on the dollar. You need protection. You need resources. And you need someone who knows how this industry works. Your father stole from my grandfather and destroyed his career. Why would I trust his son? You shouldn't. Not blindly. Thomas pulled a folder from the briefcase beside his chair and slid it across the table. That's documentation of everything my father did to Hank. The original technical drawings he copied. The patents he filed that were based on your grandfather's work. Evidence that would have won the lawsuit if Hank had been able to afford to take it to trial. Cara opened the folder carefully. Inside were photocopies of old documents. Patent applications from the early 80s with her grandfather's handwriting on them, marked confidential and stamped with dates. And beside them, nearly identical patents filed by Robert Krauss months later, with just enough changes to avoid obvious plagiarism. Why are you showing me this? Because if you work with me, we can correct the historical record. We can file amended patents that credit your grandfather as the original inventor. We can make public statements acknowledging what my father did. And we can ensure that Hank's new innovations, the ones he spent 45 years developing in secret, get the recognition they deserve. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. The idea of having resources, legal protection, a major company backing her against Vertex and Titan, that would solve so many problems. But Grandpa Hank had trusted no one for 45 years. He'd worked alone, kept everything secret, refused offers from companies that wanted to buy his work. Would he want her to partner with the son of the man who had betrayed him? I need time to think about it, Cara said. Of course. But Ms. Bellmont, time is something you don't have much of. Vertex is going to come back with a higher offer. Titan is going to start filing legal motions claiming your grandfather's work is derivative of their existing patents. And smaller companies are going to try to reverse engineer whatever they can learn about his innovations. Every day you wait is a day someone else gets closer to stealing what's yours. Then I'll move fast. But I'm not making any decisions today. Thomas stood, leaving the folder on the table. Keep that. Look through it carefully. My contact information is inside. When you're ready to talk, call me. I hope you will. After he left, Cara sat alone in the reading room, staring at the folder. Inside was evidence of theft, of betrayal, of exactly the kind of corporate greed that had driven her grandfather into isolation. But it was also proof that Thomas Krause was telling the truth. His father had stolen from Grandpa Hank. The patents, the business success, all of it was built on work that should have had Bellmont's name on it. Could the son really be different from the father? Could Cara trust someone whose last name carried so much history? Her phone buzzed. Another text from Daniel. Heard Krause Jr. tracked you down. Be careful. Don't trust anyone who offers solutions that sound too easy. Your grandpa didn't. Cara texted back. Meeting with patent attorney tomorrow in Boulder. Can you watch the workshop while I'm gone? Daniel's response was immediate. Already planning on it. I've got cameras set up now. Nobody's getting in there without me knowing. At least she had one ally she could trust. Even if it was just a neighbor who'd promised a dying man he'd look after his granddaughter. The drive back up the mountain took longer than usual because Cara stopped in town at the general store. If she was going to be staying at the cabin for more than a few days, she needed supplies. Food, firewood, basic necessities. The store owner, a weathered woman named Carol who Cara vaguely remembered from childhood, rang up her purchases without comment, but her expression was curious. You're Hank's granddaughter, Carol said as she bagged the groceries. Not a question. That's right. Heard you inherited the workshop. That's good. Hank worried nobody would appreciate what he'd built up there. You knew him? Everyone knew Hank. He didn't come down much, but when he did, he was always fair, always polite. Kept to himself mostly, but he'd help if you needed something fixed. Fixed my walk-in freezer 3 years ago when compressor was acting up. Wouldn't take any money for it. Said he'd just want to keep his skills sharp. Cara felt that familiar tightness in her throat. He was a good man. He was. And whatever you decide to do with that workshop, I hope you'll remember that. Hank didn't work all those years just to make money. He worked because he believed in doing things right. Carol handed over the bags. You look like him, you know? Around the eyes. Got his stubborn chin, too. After loading the groceries into her car, Cara sat for a moment, watching Silverpoint's Main Street. It was early afternoon now, and the town was as quiet as she remembered. A few trucks parked outside the diner. An older couple walking their dog. Nothing urgent, nothing rushed. Just mountain time, moving at its own pace. She thought about what Carol had said. Hank didn't work all those years just to make money. That was true. The letter he'd left made that clear. He'd worked because he believed craftsmanship mattered, because he wanted to solve problems that nobody else cared enough to solve, because he couldn't stand the idea of letting corporations define what innovation looked like. Money was a side effect, not the goal. And if Cara lost sight of that, if she let herself be driven by the $5 million Vertex was offering or the 70% partnership Krause Industries was dangling, she'd be missing the point entirely. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Sarah Chun. Ms. Bellmont, I've reviewed the patent applications you sent. They're extraordinary. Your grandfather was working a level I rarely see outside of advanced research labs. We need to talk ASAP. These innovations are more valuable than I initially estimated. Call me tonight if possible. Cara started the car and headed back up the mountain. She had a lot to think about before tomorrow's meeting in Boulder. And tonight, she wanted to spend more time in the workshop, really understanding what Grandpa Hank had built, what each innovation did, and why it mattered. She needed to remember who he was, and maybe, in the process, remember who she'd been before life, convince her that making things didn't matter. Section 5, the deeper secret, second layer revelation. The workshop was exactly as she'd left it, the chain and padlock, lying where she dropped them yesterday. Cara locked the door behind her and turned on all the lights, flooding the space with illumination that made every detail sharp and clear. She started with the filing cabinets, pulling out folders systematically and laying them across the main workbench. Each innovation was documented in meticulous detail. The problem it solved, the technical approach, test results showing performance under various conditions, and notes about potential applications. The first innovation, labeled thermally adaptive bearings, addressed a problem Cara had never thought about: how precision machinery maintains accuracy when temperature changes. As metal heats or cools, it expands or contracts. In most applications, that doesn't matter much. But in precision instruments, surgical robots, scientific equipment, satellite components, even a micron of variation can cause failure. Grandpa Hank's solution involved layering different materials with complementary thermal expansion coefficients, so that as one layer expanded, another contracted, keeping the overall dimension constant. The technical drawings showed bearings that looked more like art than engineering, with concentric rings of different metals precisely fitted together. The test results were remarkable. Temperature variations of 50 degrees Celsius, the kind of swing you might experience from a heated laboratory to outdoor cold, produced less than a micron of dimensional change. Most commercial bearings would expand or contract 10 times that much. Cara moved to the second innovation, harmonic dampening systems. This one addressed vibration, the enemy of precision. Every machine vibrates when it runs. Motors, gears, cutting tools, they all produce oscillations that degrade accuracy. Damping those vibrations usually involved adding weight or using materials that absorb energy, but both approaches had trade-offs. Grandpa Hank had developed a system that used geometrically arranged springs and masses tuned to specific frequencies. When the machine vibrated at its natural frequency, the dampening system would vibrate at an opposing frequency, canceling out the oscillation. It was like noise-canceling headphones, but for mechanical vibration. The applications were endless. Surgical equipment that could operate at higher speeds without losing precision. Manufacturing tools that could cut faster without introducing errors. Scientific instruments that could measure phenomena previously too subtle to detect through the noise. As Cara worked through folder after folder, she began to understand why these companies were so desperate to acquire Grandpa Hank's work. Each innovation solved a problem that engineering firms had spent millions trying to address, and he'd solved them using elegant, low-cost approaches that anyone with the right skills could manufacture. This wasn't just valuable. This was revolutionary. She was deep into the documentation for micro-adjustment mechanisms, systems that allowed precision positioning at the nanometer scale. When she noticed something odd, one of the folders was thicker than the others, and when she opened it, she found not just technical drawings but also correspondence. Letters. Dozens of them, dating back to the early 1980s. The first was from a company called Advanced Instruments Corporation, dated April 1982. Dear Mr. Bellmont, we were impressed by your patent application for thermally adaptive bearings. Although you withdrawn the application, we remain interested in licensing the technology for use in our medical imaging equipment. We'd like to discuss terms for an exclusive license in the diagnostic imaging field. Grandpa Hank's response was attached, written on a manual typewriter. Thank you for your interest. However, I'm not prepared to license this technology at this time. I'm continuing development and need to ensure the innovation is properly protected before entering into any agreements. More letters followed, each from different companies, each expressing interest in specific innovations. Some offered licensing deals. Others proposed partnerships. A few even offered to hire Grandpa Hank as a consultant. He'd turned them all down. And then, tucked near the back of the folder, Cara found something that made her blood run cold. It was a letter from Robert Krauss, dated November 1985. Hank, I've heard through industry contacts that you've been developing new precision bearing systems. Congratulations on moving past our unfortunate history. I hope you'll consider that the legal dispute between us was never personal, just business. Two professionals disagreeing about intellectual property rights. I'd like to propose that we put the past behind us. Krauss Industries has grown significantly since our partnership dissolved, and we're now in a position to manufacture and distribute innovations at scale. If you're interested in seeing your new work reach the market, I'd welcome a conversation about licensing or possibly reforming our partnership under new terms. Whatever our past disagreements, I've always respected your skills as a machinist and engineer. Let's talk. Best regards, Robert Krauss. Grandpa Hank's response was paper-clipped to Krauss's letter. It was handwritten, short, and absolutely brutal. Robert, Calling theft a disagreement about intellectual property rights is like calling murder a disagreement about who gets to be alive. You stole my work, filed patents under your name, and built a company on innovations you didn't create. That's not business. That's fraud. I have no interest in working with you now or ever. If you contact me again, I'll consider harassment and respond accordingly. Stay away from me and my work. H. Bellmont. Cara read both letters 3 times. So Robert Krause had tried to reconnect, had tried to bring Grandpa Hank back into the fold, probably hoping to get access to whatever new innovations he was developing. And Grandpa Hank had told him, in no uncertain terms, to go to hell. Good. But what did it mean that Thomas Krause was now offering essentially the same deal his father had proposed 40 years ago? A partnership, access to resources, promises of fair treatment and recognition. Was Thomas genuinely different, or was this just a more sophisticated version of the same con? Cara kept digging through the files, looking for more correspondence. Near the bottom of the stack, she found a folder labeled patent theft evidence. Inside were photocopies of documents that looked legal in nature, patent applications filed by Robert Krause in the early 1980s, with notes in Grandpa Hank's handwriting comparing them to his own work. The similarities were obvious even to Cara's untrained eye. The technical drawings showed the same basic approaches, the same geometries, just described with different terminology. And then she found the smoking gun. Internal memos from Krause Industries, dated 1982 to 1983. Somehow Grandpa Hank had gotten his hands on corporate documents that showed Robert Krause had deliberately copied designs from the work he and Hank had done together. One memo, from Krause to his engineering team, was particularly damning. Per our discussion, modify the Baron design to avoid obvious duplication of Belmont's work, but maintain the core thermal compensation approach. He won't be able to prove derivation if we change enough surface details. File the patent under my name before he gets his own application through the process. This was proof. Actual documentary evidence that Robert Krause had knowingly stolen from Grandpa Hank and deliberately obfuscated the theft to avoid legal consequences. How had Grandpa Hank obtained these documents? Cara found a note paper clipped to the memos, in handwriting she didn't recognize. Hank found these in a dumpster outside Krause's offices. Thought you should have them. They're copies, so legally admissible. Use them however you need. JM. Someone with the initials JM had gone through Krause Industries' trash, found incriminating memos, and provided them to Grandpa Hank. A friend? A former employee? Someone with a grudge against Robert Krause? Cara photographed every page of the patent theft evidence with her phone, making sure to capture all the details. This was beyond valuable. It was potentially case-ending evidence if anyone tried to claim Grandpa Hank's innovations were derivative or stolen. She was carefully refiling the documents when she heard vehicles outside. Multiple vehicles. Judging by the sound of engines, Cara's heart jumped. She quickly locked the filing cabinet and moved to one of the tall windows, peeking out through a gap in the curtains. 3 SUVs had pulled into the clearing. Black, expensive-looking, completely wrong for mountain driving. Doors opened and people emerged, at least 8 of them, all wearing business attire that looked ridiculous in the wilderness setting. And leading them was Jennifer Marsh from Vertex Precision, along with 2 people Cara didn't recognize. One was a tall man with silver hair, carrying a briefcase. The other was a woman with an expensive camera, already taking photographs of the workshop exterior. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was a corporate operation. Cara grabbed her phone and texted Daniel. Vertex here with 8 people. Need help. His response was almost instant. On my way. Stall them. She took a deep breath, grabbed her grandfather's leather jacket from where it hung by the door. It was way too big for her, but felt like armor, and stepped outside. Miss Bellmont. Jennifer's smile was bright and cold. I hope we're not intruding. We were in the area and thought we'd check in, see if you'd given any more thought to our offer. You're trespassing, Cara said flatly. This is private property, and you weren't invited. Of course. We just want to propose an adjustment to our terms. We've done more research and believe the contents of that workshop are even more valuable than we initially estimated. We're prepared to offer $12 million cash, transfer today. $12 million, more than double the previous offer. They must have gotten their hands on the patent application somehow, must have done enough analysis to understand what they were worth. Not interested. Ms. Bellmont, please be reasonable. You're in a difficult position. You have no engineering background, no experience with patent law, no resources to fight the legal battles that are coming. We're offering you a fortune for work you didn't do, for innovations you don't fully understand. Take the money and start a new life. The man with the silver hair stepped forward. Ms. Bellmont, I'm Richard Hastings, legal counsel for Vertex Precision. I need to inform you that we filed preliminary objections with the Patent Office regarding any applications related to Heinrich Bellmont's work. We have evidence suggesting that several of his innovations are derivative of existing Vertex patents and therefore not eligible for protection. That was a lie. Grandpa Hank's work predated Vertex by years. The company hadn't even existed when he was developing these innovations. You can't file objections to patents that haven't been submitted yet, Cara said. We can file preemptive objections based on publicly available information from your grandfather's earlier applications. Those applications, though withdrawn, are still on record. Any new patents building on those concepts would be derivative of our own work. More lies, but sophisticated ones. They were trying to scare her, make her think she had no legal ground to stand on. Get off my property. Ms. Bellmont, I said get off my property. You're trespassing, and I want you to leave. Now. The woman with the camera had been circling the workshop, photographing it from multiple angles. Jennifer gestured to her. We're just documenting the structure for our records. Standard procedure when considering an acquisition. You're not acquiring anything. And if you don't leave in the next 60 seconds, I'm calling the sheriff. Go ahead, Jennifer said, her smile not wavering. Sheriff Patterson is a reasonable man. I'm sure he'll understand that we're simply trying to make a legitimate business offer. And while we're waiting for him to arrive, perhaps you'd be willing to let us see inside the workshop. Just a brief tour to help us finalize our valuation. She would try to get inside, try and see what Grandpa Hank had built, what innovations were sitting in that space, what intellectual property she could photograph and document before Cara had a chance to file patents or establish legal protection. The workshop is sealed. Nobody goes in without my permission. Your grandfathers will give you ownership, but there may be claims from other parties with interest in the property. Investors your grandfather worked with, creditors, former business partners. Krauss Industries, for instance, has indicated they may have rights to certain innovations developed during your grandfather's partnership with Robert Krauss. So they knew about Krauss Industries' offer. They probably knew about Thomas's visit to the library. They were coordinating, working together to pressure her from multiple angles. Daniel's truck roared into the clearing, sliding to a stop in a spray of gravel. He jumped out, phone in hand, already filming. This is private property, he called out. You're all trespassing, and it's being documented. Behind him, 2 more trucks arrived. Local contractors by the look of them, men in work clothes who must be friends of Daniel's. They positioned themselves between the Vertex team and the workshop, arms crossed, expressions unfriendly. Jennifer's smile finally faded. This is unnecessary, Ms. Bellmont. We're simply trying to do business. By trespassing, threatening legal action, and trying to force your way into a sealed building, that's not business. That's intimidation. Richard Hastings pulled out his phone. I'm documenting this obstruction of legitimate commercial activity. Vertex Precision has made multiple good faith offers to purchase property that Ms. Bellmont may not have clear legal title to. Her refusal to engage in reasonable negotiations suggests bad faith on her part. Or, Daniel said, still filming, it suggests that she's smart enough not to sell her grandfather's life work to a company that's trying to steal it. You folks should go now, before the sheriff shows up and starts asking questions about corporate harassment. The Vertex team exchanged glances. Finally, Jennifer nodded. Very well. But Ms. Bellmont, you should know that we're not the only ones interested in this property. Larger companies with more resources are paying attention. If you think you can protect your grandfather's work alone, you're mistaken. They climbed back into their SUVs and drove away, kicking up dust as they navigated back down the rutted driveway. Cara watched until they were out of sight, her hands shaking with adrenaline. "Thank you," she said to Daniel and his friends. "No problem." Daniel turned off his phone's camera. "That's going to get worse, you know? They're testing you, trying to figure out how much pressure you can handle before you fold." "I'm not folding." "Good. But you need better security up here. Cameras, like I mentioned. Maybe some motion sensors. And someone staying at the property full-time until this settles down." One of Daniel's friends, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, spoke up. "I could stay nights if you want, Mississippi. My camper's got everything I need. Just park it here in the clearing. Keep an eye on things. I can't afford to pay you. Didn't ask you to. Hank was a friend. He helped me out more than once when I was struggling. Least I can do is watch over his granddaughter and his workshop." Cara felt tears threatening and pushed them back. "Okay, thank you, all of you." After Daniel's friends left, with the gray-bearded man, who introduced himself as Pete, promising to return with his camper that evening, Daniel and Cara walked around the property, discussing security measures. You need cameras at the driveway entrance, the workshop doors and windows, the cabin, motion-activated lights. And you need all of it connected to remote monitoring, so if someone shows up, you know immediately. How much will that cost? Couple $1,000 for a decent system. I can install it myself. Save you the labor costs. But, Cara, money's going to be a problem for you if this drags out. Patent attorneys are expensive, even on contingency. And you'll need operating funds, food, utilities, gas, everything it takes to live while you're fighting this fight. I know. I'm meeting with a patent attorney tomorrow, in Boulder. She's willing to work on contingency, but... Cara trailed off, looking at the workshop. "I need to file those patents as soon as possible, before Vertex or someone else files their own patents claiming they invented what my grandfather created. Can they do that? Just file patents for someone else's work. According to what I've been reading, if nobody's filed a patent yet, the first person to file gets priority. There's some protection for people who can prove they invented something first, but it's complicated and requires documentation. Luckily, my grandfather documented everything." They walked back toward the workshop. Inside, Cara showed Daniel the patent theft evidence she'd found, the memos proving Robert Krause had deliberately stolen from Grandpa Hank. Daniel read through them, his expression darkening. "Jesus, this is smoking gun stuff. If you have evidence this clear for the new innovations, you'll be able to defend them against challenges. I have video documentation of all the prototypes operating with timestamps and witness verification. You're in some of the videos." "That's good. That's really good." Daniel set down the folder. "But, Cara, you need to understand something. Having evidence doesn't mean you win automatically. Companies like Vertex and Krause Industries can tie you up in legal motions for years. They can file challenges, demand inspections, claim your grandfather's work was derivative of their own. Even if you eventually win, the legal costs could bankrupt you before you ever see a dime. So what do? You need allies, people with resources who are willing to fight alongside you. And you need to move fast before the corporations coordinate their strategy." Cara thought about Sarah Chun, the patent attorney who'd offered to work on contingency. Thought about Thomas Krause and his offer of partnership, resources, legal defense, manufacturing capacity. Thought about how much easier this would be if she had a major company backing her. But she also thought about Grandpa Hank, spending 45 years working alone because he couldn't trust anyone in the industry. He'd turned down offers from respected companies, legitimate partnerships, opportunities that would have made his life easier. He'd chosen isolation and struggle because he couldn't risk his work being stolen again. Was she smarter than he'd been, or just more naive? "I'm going to the meeting tomorrow with the patent attorney," Cara decided. "After that, I'll figure out next steps. But I'm not making any deals that give away control of my grandfather's work. These innovations are his legacy. I'm not letting anyone take that." Daniel nodded. "Your grandfather will be proud of you. Stubborn as hell, just like him." That night, Cara slept in the cabin with her grandfather's journal beside her on the nightstand. She'd been reading through it by flashlight, absorbing not just the technical details, but also his thoughts about craftsmanship, innovation, the meaning of doing work that mattered. One entry, dated December 1995, stood out. People think I'm bitter about what happened with Robert Krauss. They're wrong. I'm not bitter. I'm motivated. Every time I solve a problem in this workshop, every time I develop an innovation that works better than what corporations produce, I'm proving that craftsmanship matters more than capital. I'm proving that one person with skill and determination can do work that armies of engineers can't match. The isolation is hard sometimes. The financial struggle is exhausting. But I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on someone else's. I'd rather leave behind work that's mine and mine alone than get rich selling out what I believe in. Someday, someone will understand what I've built here. Someone will see the value not just in the innovations themselves, but in what they represent. The idea that integrity and skill still matter in a world that's forgotten both. I hope that someone is you. Cara, I hope you'll finish what I started. Cara closed the journal, her throat tight with emotion. He'd been writing to her, even then, even when she was still a teenager who barely understood what he did. He believed in her potential, believed she'd eventually come back, believed she'd understand what he was trying to accomplish. She couldn't let him down now. The drive to Boulder took 2 hours through winding mountain roads. Cara had left at dawn, with Pete stationed in his camper watching the workshop and Daniel installing the first of security cameras. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of October day that made Colorado famous. Brilliant blue sky, golden aspens, mountains sharp against the horizon. Sarah Chen's office was in a modern building near the University of Colorado campus, all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed successful professional. Cara fell out of place in her worn jeans and borrowed jacket, but the receptionist greeted her warmly and showed her to a conference room with a view of the Flatirons. Sarah Chun was younger than Cara expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an intensity that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. She shook Cara's hand firmly and gestured at the conference table, where she'd spread out printed copies of all 17 patent applications. "Your grandfather was brilliant," Sarah said without preamble. "I've been doing patent law for 20 years, and I've never seen work this sophisticated from an independent inventor. These innovations would be remarkable coming from a university research lab with millions in funding. The fact that he developed them alone over decades with limited resources, it's extraordinary." "Thank you. He'd be glad to hear that. I've done preliminary research on each innovation, checked existing patents, searched academic literature, looked for prior art that could challenge your claims. And Ms. Bellmont, Cara, these are clean. Every single one is novel, non-obvious, and defensible. Your grandfather was meticulous about making sure his approaches were truly innovative rather than just incremental improvements." Sarah pulled up a document on her laptop and turned it so Cara could see. It was a spreadsheet with projected licensing values for each innovation. The numbers made Cara's head spin. Conservative estimate. Assuming we file and successfully defend all 17 patents, we're looking at $50 to $75 million in licensing fees over the next decade. That's conservative. If we're aggressive in marketing to the right industries, if we negotiate favorable terms, we could easily double or triple that. $150 million? Possibly. These innovations solve problems that multiple industries have been throwing money at for years. Aerospace, medical devices, scientific instruments, manufacturing. They all need better precision systems. Your grandfather created solutions that are elegant, cost-effective, and scalable. That's incredibly valuable. Cara sat down heavily. She'd known the workshop contained valuable work, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. This was generational wealth. This was enough money to never worry about anything again. But, Sarah continued, and her tone shifted, realizing that value requires surviving the next 6 months. Companies like Vertex Precision and Krauss Industries are going to fight us every step of the way. They'll file challenges, claim prior art, try to prove your grandfather's work is derivative. They'll tie us up in legal motions until we run out of money or patience. How do we fight that? We file all 17 patents simultaneously. We make it too expensive for them to challenge everything at once. We go public with the story. Your grandfather's history of being robbed by Robert Kraus, his 45 years of secret innovation, the fact that major corporations are now trying to steal his work all over again. We make this a PR nightmare for anyone who tries to take what's yours. Won't going public make things worse? It'll make things different. Right now, these companies think they can pressure you quietly, make you fold before anyone notices. If we go public, they'll have to be more careful. They can't be seen bullying a grieving granddaughter out of her inheritance. The optics would be terrible. Cara thought about the journalist who'd eventually cover the story, about her personal life being exposed, about having to relive the fight with Grandpa Hank and the 15 years of silence. I'm not sure I want that kind of attention. I understand. But, Cara, you need to think strategically. These corporations have unlimited resources. You don't. Your only advantage is public sympathy and the moral high ground. If we go public, we control the narrative. If we stay quiet, they define who you are and what this fight is about. Sarah pulled up another document, a timeline. Here's what I'm proposing. Today's Wednesday. We file all 17 patents on Monday. That gives us 5 days to prepare the applications, gather supporting documentation, and get everything in order. The moment we file, we hold a press conference. We tell your grandfather's story. Show the world what he built, and make it clear that you're not backing down. A press conference? You, me, and anyone else who can speak to your grandfather's character and skills. That neighbor who's been helping you, Daniel? He could talk about witnessing the prototypes. Anyone from the community who knew your grandfather and respected his work. We build a narrative of integrity versus corporate greed, craftsmanship versus theft. Cara's stomach churned. She'd come here hoping for legal guidance, not a media strategy. But Sarah was right. Staying quiet meant fighting on the corporation's terms. Going public meant changing the battlefield. What happens after we file the patents? We wait for challenges, which will definitely come. But in the meantime, we start reaching out to potential licensees, companies that aren't Vertex or Kraus or Titan, mid-sized manufacturing firms that would benefit from your grandfather's innovations without trying to steal them. We offer licensing deals that are fair but lucrative. We show the industry that we're serious about commercializing this work, not just sitting on it. And if the patents get challenged and rejected, then we appeal. We provide more documentation, more evidence. We fight every single challenge until we win or run out of options. But Cara, with documentation as strong as what your grandfather left, I don't think we'll lose. These patents are defensible. The question isn't whether we'll win. It's how much it'll cost us in time and money before we do. Sarah closed her laptop and looked directly at Cara. I need to be honest with you. This fight is going to be brutal. You'll be under constant pressure. Companies will make offers, threats, legal maneuvers. The media attention will be invasive. Your personal life will be scrutinized. And there will be moments when taking a buyout, even at a fraction of what this is worth, will seem very appealing. Are you trying to talk me out of this? No. I'm making sure you understand what you're signing up for. Because once we file those patents, there's no going back. You'll be committed to seeing this through, no matter how hard it gets. Cara thought about Grandpa Hank, spending 45 years alone on that mountain, refusing every offer, turning down every partnership, maintaining his principles even when it cost him everything. I'm already committed, she said. Let's file the patents. They spent the next 4 hours going through documentation. Sarah needed proof of conception for each innovation. Evidence showing when Grandpa Hank had first developed the ideas, how they'd evolved over time, what testing he'd done. The journal helped with that, providing dated entries describing each breakthrough. The video documentation was even better, showing prototypes in operation with timestamps. Sarah also needed Cara to sign documents establishing her legal right to file patents on behalf of her grandfather's estate. Since Grandpa Hank had died and left everything to her, she had that right, but it needed to be formalized. One more thing, Sarah said as they were wrapping up. I need to know about any offers you received. Vertex, Kraus Industries, anyone else? Were they proposing? And have you given any indication you might accept? Cara told her about Jennifer Marsh's escalating offers from 5 to 12 million, about Thomas Krause's partnership proposal with its promise of resources and recognition, about the trespassing incident yesterday, the legal threats, the attempts to get inside the workshop. Sarah took notes, her expression growing more serious. They're coordinated. Vertex and Krause are almost certainly sharing information, maybe even working together to pressure you from multiple angles. The fact that they both showed up within days of your grandfather's death, both with prepared offers, that's not coincidence. How would they even know to watch for his death? Death certificates are public record, like I mentioned. But more than that, companies like this monitor patent databases constantly. They look for brilliant independent inventors who might be developing valuable work. When they found your grandfather's withdrawn applications from the 80s, they probably flagged him for ongoing observation. The moment he died, they knew his work would become available. That's creepy. That's business, unfortunately. Intellectual property is worth billions, and companies invest heavily in finding it before competitors do. Sarah closed her notebook. The good news is that their eagerness works in our favor. If they're this desperate to acquire your grandfather's work, it means they know how valuable it is. When we go public, that desperation will be obvious. It'll make them look predatory. What about Thomas Krause specifically? Do you think he's genuinely trying to make amends for what his father did? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think he probably does feel guilty about his father's actions. But guilt doesn't mean he's offering you a fair deal. 30% of revenue sounds generous until you realize that Krause Industries will control production, distribution, pricing, everything that determines what those revenues actually are. They could easily manipulate the numbers to minimize your share. So I shouldn't trust him. You shouldn't trust anyone who's offering you a deal that sounds too good to be true. If Thomas Krause genuinely wanted to make amends, he'd offer to fund your patent filings with no strings attached, then compete fairly in the marketplace once your work was protected. The fact that he wanted a partnership, wants access to the innovations before they're even patented, that's a red flag. Cara thought about the folder Thomas had given her, the evidence of his father's theft. It had seemed like proof of honesty, but maybe it was just a tactic. Give her something valuable to build trust, then leverage that trust into a deal that benefited Krause Industries. Okay, she said. No deals until the patents are filed, and we know what we're working with. Exactly. Sarah stood and gathered her papers. I'll start preparing the applications today. I'll need you to send me all the video documentation. Upload it to the secure server I'll give you access to. And I'll need you to be available this week for questions as I'm reviewing the technical details. Can you do that? Yes. I'm staying at the cabin, and I've got internet access at the library in Silverpoint. Good. One last thing, and this is important. Don't let anyone into that workshop. Not Vertex, not Krause Industries, not journalists, nobody. Once we file the patents, the workshop becomes evidence. We need to preserve it exactly as your grandfather left it. Any alterations could be used to challenge our claims. What about Daniel? And Pete, the guy who's watching property? They're fine, as long as they're not touching or moving anything technical. But anyone else, you turn them away, even if they have a court order. Make them go through me first. After the meeting, Cara sat in her car in the parking lot, trying to process everything. 5 days until the patents were filed. 5 days until this became public. Until her life became a battlefield between her grandfather's legacy and corporate interests worth billions. She pulled out her phone and saw 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize, plus a voicemail. She listened to it with growing unease. Ms. Bellmont, this is Marcus Wu, VP of Strategic Acquisitions for Titan Manufacturing. I understand you received offers from other companies regarding your grandfather's workshop. I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement. Titan has resources that dwarf both Vertex and Krause Industries. We can offer you $20 million cash, plus ongoing royalties, plus complete legal protection against any challenges to your patents. Please call me back today. This offer expires at 5 p.m. $20 million. It expired in, Cara checked the time, 3 hours. That was a pressure tactic, obviously. The artificial deadline was meant to force a quick decision. to make her panic and accept before thinking through the implications. But still, $20 million. That was more money than she'd ever imagined having. That was enough to never worry about anything ever again. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Ms. Bellmont? Marcus Wu from Titan Manufacturing. Did you receive my voicemail? I did. $20 million is a lot of money. It is. And unlike other offers you've received, this one comes with no strings attached. You sell us the contents of the workshop, tools, documentation, prototypes, everything. We file the patents under our name, handle all legal challenges, and you walk away wealthy and unburdened. You can start a new life, pursue art or whatever you're passionate about, without spending the next decade fighting legal battles. Patents filed under your name, not my grandfather's. There was a brief pause. That's standard practice for acquired intellectual property. Yes. But we'd be happy to include an acknowledgement in the patent applications, noting that the innovations were based on Heinrich Bellmont's original work. An acknowledgement, not credit as the inventor. Ms. Bellmont, let's be practical. Your grandfather is deceased. He won't benefit from having his name on patents. But you can benefit from financial security our offer provides. $20 million guaranteed with no legal risk, no years of fighting. That's a generous offer. My grandfather spent 45 years developing those innovations. He sacrificed relationships, comfort, recognition, everything, to build something that mattered, and you wanted to sell it so you can put your company's name on his work? That's exactly what Robert Kraus did to him in 1979. This is nothing like that situation. We're offering you fair market value. Fair market value for theft. No thank you, Mr. Wu. Ms. Bellmont, you need to understand something. Titan Manufacturing has resources that you can't imagine. If you refuse this offer, if you try to file those patents yourself, we will challenge every single one. We have evidence that several of your grandfather's innovations are derivative of work we've already patented. We'll tie you up in legal battles until you run out of money. Then I guess I'll see you in court. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking. $20 million. She'd just turned down $20 million. Was she insane? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Daniel. You need to get back here now. Kraus Jr. showed up with a county inspector. They're trying to get into the workshop, claiming safety concerns. Pete and I are holding them off, but don't know how long we can stall. Cara started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, her foot heavy on the gas. The 2-hour drive back to Silverpoint suddenly felt like an eternity. Section 7. The major confrontation, the stand. She made it back in 90 minutes, pushing her aging Honda faster than she should have on the mountain roads. The clearing was crowded with vehicles when she arrived. Daniel's truck, Pete's camper, a Kraus Industries sedan, and a county truck with building inspector on the side. Thomas Kraus stood on the workshop porch with a middle-aged man in a county uniform. Daniel and Pete blocked the doorway, arms crossed, looking like they were ready to get physical if necessary. Cara jumped out her car and strode toward them. What's going on here? Thomas turned to her with what looked like genuine relief. Ms. Bellmont, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. We have a serious problem. The problem is you're on my property without permission. I'm here because I received a complaint about potential safety violations in this workshop. As someone with a legitimate interest in the property, you have no interest in this property. You have no rights here. The county inspector stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Gerald Davidson, county building inspector. I received a complaint that the structure might contain hazardous materials, chemical solvents, compressed gases, equipment that could pose a danger if not properly maintained. I need to inspect the interior to verify safety compliance. Who filed the complaint? Davidson glanced at Thomas. An anonymous tip, actually, but Mr. Kraus here has offered to accompany me as someone familiar with precision machining facilities. How convenient. Cara looked directly at Thomas. You filed an anonymous complaint, so you'd have an excuse to get inside. That's creative. Cara, please. I'm genuinely concerned. Your grandfather worked with materials and equipment that can be dangerous if not properly handled. If something happened, If there was a chemical leak or a gas explosion, you could be liable. The workshop has been sealed for weeks. If there was a hazardous condition, it would have manifested already. Or it could be building up, getting worse. Please let us inspect. For your own safety. Cara looked at Daniel, who shook his head slightly. This was a trap. If she let them inside, Thomas would see everything. The prototypes, the documentation, the innovations. He'd be able to photograph everything. Claim that Krauss Industries had consulted on safety issues. Establish a relationship that could complicate her patent claims later. No, she said firmly. You're not going inside. Davidson pulled out a clipboard. Ma'am, I have authority under county code to inspect any structure where safety concerns have been reported. If you refuse access, I can obtain a warrant. Then obtain a warrant. But you're not going in there today. Ms. Bellmont, Thomas said, his voice taking on a harder edge. You're making this difficult for everyone. I came here in good faith, trying to help, but if you're going to be unreasonable. Good faith? You filed a fake complaint to manufacture an excuse to get inside my grandfather's workshop. You're trying to see his innovations before I've had a chance to protect them legally. That's not good faith. That's corporate espionage. That's a serious accusation. It's an accurate one. Cara pulled out her phone and showed him Sarah Chen's number. This is my patent attorney. If you want access to this property, you go through her. Otherwise, you and the inspector need to leave. Now! Thomas's friendly demeanor finally cracked. You're making a mistake. You think you can protect this work alone? You think your attorney and your two friends here can stand against companies worth billions? We're trying to help you. But if you refuse every reasonable offer, if you insist on fighting, then I'll fight. My grandfather fought alone for 45 years. I can do the same. Your grandfather died alone on this mountain with nothing to show for his work except a workshop full of prototypes that nobody knew existed. Is that what you want? To spend your life isolated and struggling, clinging to principles that don't pay the bills? The words hit harder than Cara expected, because Thomas was right, in a way. Grandpa Hank had died alone, poor, unknown outside of Silverpoint. His innovations might be worth millions, but he'd never seen any of that value. He'd sacrificed everything for principles that, in the end, hadn't protected him from dying in obscurity. Was she making the same mistake? Daniel stepped forward, his phone out and recording. Mr. Krauss, you're currently on private property after being asked to leave. That's trespassing, and you're pressuring Ms. Bellmont to grant access to her property under false pretenses. That's harassment. I'm documenting all of this. Thomas looked at the phone, then at Davidson. Let's go. We'll get a warrant if necessary. They left, but not before Thomas turned back to Cara one last time. My offer still stands. Partnership, resources, recognition for your grandfather's work. But it won't stand forever. Think about it. After they were gone, Cara sat down on the workshop steps, suddenly exhausted. Pete brought her a bottle of water from his camper, while Daniel reviewed the video he'd taken. That was a coordinated attack, Daniel said. Thomas filed a complaint, then showed up with an inspector he probably bribed or pressured. If he let them in, they would have documented everything, possibly even taken samples or photographs as part of the inspection. Can they actually get a warrant? Maybe, but it'll take time, and they'll have to show legitimate safety concerns. Your attorney can fight it, delay it, maybe get it thrown out entirely. Daniel sat down beside her. But Cara, this isn't going to stop. They're going to keep coming at you from different angles until something works. I know. So what's your plan? File the patents Monday. Go public with the story. Force them to fight in the open instead of through these manipulative tactics. And if they tie you up in legal battles for years, then I fight for years. I can't let them win, Daniel. If I sell out now, if I let them take my grandfather's work and put their names on it, he'll have died for nothing. 45 years of struggle and isolation, all for nothing. Pete, who'd been quietly listening, spoke up. Your grandfather wasn't struggling for nothing, even if nobody knew about his work. He was proving something to himself every day, that he could do work that mattered, that he didn't need corporate approval or recognition. That's worth something all by itself. But what if I can't protect it? What if I fight and lose and his innovations end up stolen anyway? Then at least you fought, Pete said simply. At least you tried. That's all anyone can do. Cara's phone rang. Sarah Chun, I heard about the inspection attempt, Sarah said without preamble. Thomas Krause called my office afterward, claiming I was advising you to obstruct legitimate safety inspections. I set him straight, but he's escalating. We need to move faster than Monday. How fast? I can have the patent applications ready by Friday if I work around the clock. We file Friday morning. Hold the press conference Friday afternoon. We don't give them time to coordinate a response. That's 2 days from now. I know. Can you get me everything I need by tomorrow night? All the video documentation, scans of your grandfather's journal, any additional evidence you haven't sent yet? Cara thought about the patent theft evidence she'd found, the memos proving Robert Krause had deliberately stolen from Grandpa Hank. I have more than you know. Documents proving the Krause family has a history of theft. I'll scan everything tonight and send it. Perfect. And Cara? Start thinking about what you want to say at the press conference. Your grandfather's story, why his work matters, why you're fighting. Make it personal, make it compelling. We need people on your side. After hanging up, Cara looked at Daniel and Pete. I need to spend tonight in the workshop, going through every last file, scanning everything. Can you two keep watch outside? Make sure nobody gets in while I'm working. Of course, Daniel said, but you should eat something first. You look like you're about to fall over. They ordered pizza from the only place in Silverpoint that delivered, a mediocre chain restaurant that Pete claimed had gone downhill since the 90s. While they ate, Cara told him about the meeting with Sarah, about the plan to file Friday and go public immediately. That's risky, Daniel said. You're going to paint a target on your back. The target's already there. At least this way, other people will be watching to see what happens. It's harder to steal from someone when journalists are paying attention. After dinner, Cara set up a scanning station at the main workbench in the workshop. She worked systematically through filing cabinets, scanning every technical drawing, every page of calculations, every test result. The journal took the longest, hundreds of pages of Grandpa Hank's careful handwriting, documenting 45 years of innovation. She found more correspondence she'd missed before, letters from other inventors who'd been robbed by corporations, reaching out to Grandpa Hank in solidarity. He'd kept every one, organized them chronologically. It was a chronicle of systemic theft, of brilliant people being crushed by companies that had more lawyers than ethics. One letter, from an inventor named James Chun, dated 1989, was particularly moving. Hank, I heard what Krause did to you. Same thing happened to me with Vertex Precision. They stole my Baron designs, filed patents under their engineers' names, then sued me for infringement when I tried to protect my own work. I couldn't afford to fight. Had to settle, sign away my rights, pretend it never happened. I'm writing because I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. Don't trust the system. Don't think that having good documentation or clear evidence will protect you. These companies have unlimited resources, and they'll use them to grind you down until you give up. The only way to beat them is to keep your work secret until you're ready to release it on your own terms. Build prototypes. Document everything. But don't file patents until you have the resources to defend them. Don't partner with anyone who could betray you. Stay independent. Stay hidden and wait for the right moment. I know it's lonely. I know it means sacrificing recognition and financial reward in the short term. But it's the only way to protect what you've built. Good luck, brother. Fight smart, not just hard. James Chun. Cara photographed the letter and added it to the pile of evidence. James Chen's advice was exactly what Grandpa Hank had followed. Staying hidden, working alone, waiting for the right moment. And he'd chosen Cara to be that right moment. The person who'd finally bring his work into the light, armed with documentation and evidence and the legal protection he'd never been able to afford. She wouldn't let him down. By 3 a.m, she'd scanned everything. Gigabytes of documentation, all uploaded to Sarah's secure server. Her eyes burned. Her back ached from hunching over the scanner. But it was done. She stepped outside into the cold mountain night. Daniel and Pete had stayed awake the whole time, taking shifts watching the driveway and monitoring the security cameras Daniel had installed. No one had come. No vehicles. No trespassers. No corporate representatives trying to manufacture another excuse to gain access. All done, Daniel asked, handing her a thermos of coffee. All done. Sarah's everything she needs. Then you should sleep. It's going to be a hard couple of days. But Cara wasn't ready to sleep yet. She walked to the edge of the clearing, looking out over the valley. Silverpoint was invisible in the darkness. Just a handful of lights scattered across the mountainside. Beyond that, more mountains, ridge after ridge fading into the distance. Grandpa Hank had chosen to build his life here, in this remote place where nobody watched and nobody interfered. He'd turned isolation into a strength, using the distance from civilization to protect his work from those who'd steal it. But isolation had costs. He'd died without seeing his innovations used, without recognition, without knowing if anyone would ever understand what he'd accomplished. Cara wasn't going to let that sacrifice be in vain. In 2 days, she'd file patents. She'd tell his story to journalists. She'd fight Vertex and Krauss Industries and Titan Manufacturing in court, in the media, in every arena where truth mattered more than resources. And if she lost, if the corporations found a way to steal his work despite everything, at least she'd go down fighting. At least she'd make them work for it. At least Grandpa Hank's 45 years of struggle would be honored by someone who understood what he'd been trying to prove. She finished the coffee and went back inside to sleep, knowing that in 48 hours, everything would change. Section 8. The victory resolution achieved. Friday morning arrived with snow flurries, early even for October at this elevation. Cara woke before dawn, nerves jangling. Today was the day. Today they filed the patents and went public with everything. She dressed carefully, not the worn jeans and borrowed jacket she'd been living in, but the one professional outfit she brought from Denver. Black slacks, a charcoal blouse, the blazer she used to wear to client meetings back when she worked in marketing. She needed to look like someone who could handle corporate pressure, not like a broke artist squatting in her dead grandfather's cabin. Daniel picked her up at 8. The plan was to drive to Boulder together, meet Sarah at her office, file the patents electronically, then hold the press conference at noon. Sarah had arranged for a conference room at a local hotel, invited journalists from major Colorado papers plus trade publications covering the manufacturing industry. You ready for this? Daniel asked as they wound down the mountain. No, but I'm doing it anyway. At Sarah's office, they found her running on adrenaline and coffee, surrounded by printed patent applications. Everything's ready to file, she said, barely looking up. I've triple-checked every application, every claim, every technical drawing. They're perfect. Your grandfather did remarkable work, and these applications reflect that. She pulled up the filing portal on her computer. Once I hit submit, these applications become public record. Companies monitoring patent databases will see them within hours. We'll immediately start getting responses, challenges, offers, legal threats. Are you prepared for that? Cara thought about Grandpa Hank, spending 45 years preparing for exactly this moment. Yes. Then let's do this. Sarah clicked submit. All 17 patent applications filed simultaneously, each one claiming Heinrich Bellmont as the inventor and Cara Bellmont as the executor of his estate. The system processed them for a moment, then displayed confirmation numbers. Done, Sarah said. They're in the system. Now the real fight begins. They had 3 hours until the press conference. Sarah used the time to coach Cara on what to say, how to handle hostile questions, how to present Grandpa Hank's story in a way that was compelling without being melodramatic. The key points, Sarah said, are integrity, innovation, and injustice. Your grandfather had integrity. He refused to compromise his principles, even when it cost him everything. He was an innovator. His work solves problems that billion-dollar companies haven't been able to solve. And he faced injustice. He was robbed by a business partner and then spent decades working alone because he couldn't trust the system. That's a powerful narrative. What if they ask about the offers I've received? Should I mention the dollar amounts? Absolutely. $12 million from Vertex, $20 million from Titan. The fact that they're offering that much proves they know his work is valuable. When you turned down those offers to protect his legacy instead, you became the hero of this story. The hotel conference room filled up quickly. Journalists from the Denver Post, Boulder Daily Camera, and the Colorado Springs Gazette. Trade publication reporters covering manufacturing, precision engineering, aerospace. Even a freelancer from a national tech blog who'd driven down from Fort Collins when she heard about the story. Sarah had set up a presentation screen showing images of the workshop, Grandpa Hank's tools, and technical drawings of several innovations. Nothing too detailed. They didn't want to give away proprietary information, but enough to show the sophistication of his work. At noon precisely, Sarah called a conference to order. She introduced herself, explained her role as Cara's attorney, then launched into a prepared statement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. We're here to announce the filing of 17 patent applications for innovations in precision engineering, developed over 45 years by Heinrich Bellmont. These innovations solve long-standing problems in manufacturing, aerospace, medical devices, and scientific instrumentation. They represent a lifetime of dedicated craftsmanship from a brilliant independent inventor. Sarah gestured to the presentation screen. Mr. Bellmont passed away in September at the age of 98. He left his life's work to his granddaughter, Cara Bellmont, who is here today to speak about his legacy and the challenges she's facing in protecting his innovations from corporate theft. Cara stood, her mouth dry, her hands shaking slightly. She'd practiced the speech a dozen times, but standing in front of actual journalists with cameras and recorders made it feel devastatingly real. My grandfather was betrayed in 1979, she began. His business partner, Robert Krauss, stole his innovations and filed patents under his own name. My grandfather tried to fight legally, but he couldn't afford the battle. He was forced to settle, to sign away his rights, to watch someone else build a fortune on work he created. She clicked to the next slide, showing the newspaper article about the lawsuit. After that betrayal, my grandfather moved to Silverpoint, Colorado. He built a workshop on a remote mountain property. And for the next 45 years, he worked alone, developing innovations that he kept secret because he couldn't trust anyone in the industry not to steal from him again. Next slide, the workshop interior, showing the pristine tools and sophisticated equipment. This is where he worked. Every tool you see, he built himself. Every machine was fabricated to standards that professional machinists call impossible. And in this workshop, he developed 17 groundbreaking innovations that are now the subject of patent applications filed this morning. The journalists were taking notes, cameras flashing. Cara could see some of them already searching their phones, pulling up the patent applications on the USPTO database. Within days of my grandfather's death, Cara continued, major corporations began offering to buy his work. Vertex Precision Engineering offered $12 million. Titan Manufacturing offered $20 million. They wanted everything, the tools, the documentation, the innovations, and they wanted the patents filed under their names, not his. She paused, making eye contact with the journalists. I turned down those offers because my grandfather didn't spend 45 years alone on a mountain just so someone else could take credit for his brilliance. He deserves recognition. His name deserves to be on those patents. And I'm here to make sure that happens, no matter how hard these corporations fight to stop me. Next slide. The evidence of Robert Krauss's theft. The memos showing deliberate copying of Grandpa Hank's work. This is what my grandfather was fighting against. This is why he couldn't trust the system. Robert Krauss stole from him deliberately, knowingly, and faced no consequences. And now his son, Thomas Krauss, runs a company built on that theft while offering me a partnership to access my grandfather's new innovations. The room was completely silent. Every journalist was riveted. I'm not interested in partnerships with companies that have a history of theft. I'm not interested in selling out for millions when my grandfather's work is worth hundreds of millions. I'm interested in justice. I'm interested in making sure that brilliant inventors can't be crushed by corporations with more money than ethics. And I'm interested in honoring a man who sacrificed everything for his principles. Final slide. Grandpa Hank's photograph from the 1950s, young and proud, standing beside machinery he'd built. This is Heinrich Bellmont. Remember his name, because in the coming months, you're going to hear a lot as these patent applications are processed, and as corporations try to challenge them. And when you hear companies claiming his work is derivative or stolen or not worthy of protection, remember that they're the ones who've been trying to steal it since before he was even buried. Cara sat down, her heart pounding. Sarah stood back up to field questions. The first came from the Denver Post. Ms. Bellmont, what makes you think you can win against companies worth billions? Cara answered before Sarah could. Because I have the truth. My grandfather documented everything. Every innovation, every development step, every test result. We have video. Evidence of prototypes operating years before these companies filed their own patents. We have witnesses who can verify dates and functionality. The truth is powerful, even against billions of dollars. Next question, from a trade publication. Have you considered that these corporations might be offering fair deals? That their valuations might be accurate based on the actual market value of these innovations? If their valuations were fair, Cara said, they wouldn't be trying so hard to avoid giving my grandfather credit as the inventor. Fair deals don't require erasing someone's name from their life's work. A journalist from a tech blog. What happens if your patents get rejected? If the challenges succeed? Then we appeal. And if the appeals fail, we go public with everything. All the evidence, all the documentation, all the proof that the system failed to protect a brilliant inventor. We make it impossible for these corporations to profit from stolen work without massive public backlash. More questions followed about the specific innovations, about Grandpa Hank's background, about the legal strategy going forward. Sarah fielded the technical ones. Cara handled the personal ones. And together they built a narrative that was compelling and clear. Integrity versus greed, innovation versus theft, justice versus corporate power. After 45 minutes, Sarah called the conference to a close. We'll provide updates as the patent examination process moves forward. Thank you for your time and attention. As the journalists packed up their equipment, several approached Cara directly. The tech blog freelancer wanted to do a longer feature story. The Denver Post wanted to visit the workshop and photograph the equipment. Trade publications wanted technical interviews about specific innovations. Sarah handled them all, taking business cards, promising follow-ups, making sure nobody got more access than Cara was comfortable with. They'd succeeded in generating interest, but they needed to control the narrative carefully. Outside the hotel, Daniel was waiting in his truck. How'd it go? I think we did it, Cara said, suddenly exhausted. I think people are actually listening. Her phone started buzzing before they even left the parking lot. Unknown numbers, one after another. She ignored them, but they kept coming. Finally, one left a voicemail. She listened on speakerphone so Sarah and Daniel could hear. Ms. Bellmont, this is Jennifer Marsh from Vertex Precision. I just watched your press conference. You've made some serious allegations against our company and our industry. I need to speak with you immediately to correct several misstatements, and Cara deleted it. Another voicemail came in. This one from Thomas Kraus. Cara, what you did today was reckless and damaging. You accused my family of theft based on decades-old disputes that were legally settled. You've poisoned the well for any future collaboration. I tried to help you, tried to offer a fair partnership, and you responded by attacking us publicly. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. She deleted that one, too. A third voicemail from Marcus Wu at Titan Manufacturing. Ms. Bellmont, Titan Manufacturing will be filing formal challenges to all 17 of your patent applications. We have evidence that multiple innovations are derivative of our existing patents. We'll also be filing suit for defamation based on your accusations at today's press conference. You should expect to hear from our attorneys within 72 hours. Sarah listened to that one twice, taking notes. They're moving faster than I expected. They'll file challenges immediately, probably today. We need to get ahead of this. But before they could discuss strategy, Cara's phone rang with a number she recognized. The county clerk's office. Ms. Bellmont? This is Sandra from the county clerk. I'm calling because we received 3 separate requests today for property records related to your grandfather's land. Vertex Precision, Krause Industries, and Titan Manufacturing. They're asking for surveys, tax records, everything. I wanted to let you know because it seems coordinated. What are they looking for? Hard to say. Could be legitimate due diligence. Could be looking for any irregularity they can use against you. Unpaid taxes, boundary disputes, environmental violations. We've got a clean property record on file, so they won't find anything. But the fact that all 3 requested records within an hour of your press conference suggests they're coordinating their response. After hanging up, Cara looked at Sarah. They're coming at us from every angle. Patent challenges, defamation suits, property record searches. What do? We defend. I'll handle the legal challenges. You handle the media. Keep telling your grandfather's story. Keep the public on your side. And whatever offers come next, and they will come, you run them past me before responding. The drive back to Silverpoint took 3 hours because they stopped in Denver for Cara to do 2 radio interviews and 1 television spot. Sarah had arranged them while they were still at the press conference. Capitalizing on the immediate interest, the television interview was with a local news anchor who seemed genuinely sympathetic to Cara's story. You turned down $20 million, she said, almost in disbelief. Why? Because my grandfather didn't work 45 years, so I could get rich. He worked 45 years to prove that craftsmanship matters, that innovation can come from anywhere, that one person with skill and determination can do work that corporations can't match. If I took their money, I'd be saying he was wrong. That corporate approval is all that matters, that the only value in innovation is how much someone will pay for it. But $20 million would set you up for life. It would, but I'd spend the rest of my life knowing I sold out someone who never compromised. My grandfather died alone and poor, but he died with his integrity intact. I can't put a price on that. The clip will be playing on evening news broadcasts across Colorado by dinner time. Sarah was already fielding calls from national outlets, CNN, CNBC, NPR, all wanting interviews. The story was going viral. By the time they reached Silverpoint, it was nearly dark. Pete met them at the cabin with news that 3 different people had tried to access the property while they were gone, all claiming to be journalists, though Pete was pretty sure at least one was actually a corporate operative trying to get photos of the workshop. I didn't let anyone pass the driveway, Pete said. Told them they had to go through your attorney. Hope that was right. That was perfect, Cara said. Thank you. Inside the cabin, she collapsed onto the couch. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, text calls, emails, all demanding attention. She turned it off and sat in blessed silence for a moment. You did good today, Daniel said, settling into the chair across from her. Your grandfather would have been proud. I hope so. I keep wondering if I'm doing this right. If he'd approve of going public, making this such a big spectacle. He kept it secret because he had to, not because he wanted to. I think he'd be glad you're finally telling his story, making sure people know what he accomplished. Cara pulled out Grandpa Hank's journal and opened it to a random page. The entry was dated March 2003. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like if people knew about my work, if engineers and manufacturers understood what I've developed up here. Would they respect it? Would they see the value? Or would they just try to take it the way Robert took everything before? I tell myself it doesn't matter whether anyone knows. The work itself is a reward. The satisfaction of solving a problem elegantly, of building something that works perfectly, of achieving precision that others think is impossible. That should be enough. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't want recognition. Want someone to look at these innovations and understand what they represent. Want my name on patents that will outlive me. Want proof that I was here, that I mattered, that my life's work wasn't just a lonely old man's obsession. Maybe that makes me vain. Maybe true craftsmanship should need no recognition. But I'm human, and humans want to be remembered. Cara closed the journal, tears in her eyes. He'd wanted this. Wanted recognition. Wanted credit. Wanted the world to know what he'd accomplished. And now, finally, he was getting it. Not because of his own efforts, but because his granddaughter had refused to let his work die in obscurity. Her phone vibrated despite being turned off. An emergency alert. She turned it back on and saw an email from Sarah with urgent in the subject line. Cara, all 3 companies have filed formal patent challenges. They're also threatening suits for defamation, interference with business relationships, and something called tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. Translation: they're claiming your press conference cost them money by making it harder for them to license your grandfather's work. But here's the good news. I've heard from 6 mid-sized manufacturing firms who saw the press conference and want to discuss licensing. They're sympathetic to your story and willing to pay fair rates for access to the innovations. If even 2 of them follow through, we'll have the capital to fight the legal battles. Call me in the morning. Get some rest. You did great today. Cara set down the phone and looked around the cabin. This small space that had been Grandpa Hank's refuge, his fortress against a world that had betrayed him. The walls held his photographs, his books, his careful notes about every project he'd ever worked on. He died here alone. But his legacy, the real legacy, the work that mattered, was finally being recognized. Not by the corporations who tried to steal it, but by journalists, by engineers, by people who understood that innovation could come from anywhere if given a chance. I think we're going to win, she said softly to Daniel. Not because we're smarter or richer, but because we're right. And sometimes that's enough. Section 9, The New Life, Epilogue and Future. 6 months later. The April sun was warm on Cara's face as she stood on the workshop porch, watching construction crew work on a new building. The addition would double the workshop size, adding climate-controlled storage for sensitive equipment and a proper classroom for teaching precision machining to apprentices. The patents had been approved, all 17 of them, despite months of challenges and legal battles. Vertex Precision had withdrawn their objections after their engineers testified that no, they'd never developed anything comparable to Grandpa Hank's thermally adaptive bearings. Krauss Industries had settled for an undisclosed sum rather than face a public trial where the evidence of Robert Krauss's original theft will be entered into record. And Titan Manufacturing had quietly filed for licensing terms after realizing they couldn't win. The licensing deals were bringing in more money than Cara had imagined possible. 3 medical device companies, 2 aerospace manufacturers, and a scientific instruments firm had all signed contracts. Conservative estimates put the revenue at $60 million over the next decade. Maybe more of the innovations proved as transformative as everyone expected. She'd use some of that money to pay Sarah Chen's contingency fee, $12 million, earned through hundreds of hours of legal work and brilliant strategy, worth every penny. The rest was being invested in the Bellmont Precision Innovation Fund, a nonprofit that would provide grants and legal support to independent inventors facing corporate theft. Cara had hired James Chen's daughter, the inventor who'd written to Grandpa Hank about staying hidden, to run the fund. She understood the mission on a personal level. The workshop itself had become something between a museum and an active research facility. Engineering students from universities across Colorado came to tour, to see the tools Grandpa Hank had built, to understand how one person with dedication and skill could accomplish what corporations couldn't. And Cara had started teaching. Not engineering. She wasn't qualified for that, but design thinking, creative problem solving, the art of translating vision into reality. She'd partnered with the University of Colorado to offer a course called Innovation Outside the System, using Grandpa Hank's story and methods as a case study. Her students loved it. They were hungry for examples of people succeeding through craftsmanship and determination rather than corporate backing. Grandpa Hank had become something of a folk hero to them, proof that integrity and innovation could coexist. Daniel had quit his contracting business and now managed the workshop full-time. He'd become Cara's closest friend, the person who understood what she'd been through and what she was trying to build. He'd also started documenting other independent inventors in Colorado, creating video archives of their work before corporations could steal it. Pete still lived in his camper in the clearing, having declared that he'd never had better neighbors and saw no reason to leave. He'd become the workshop's unofficial security chief, though mostly he spent his days helping with construction and telling stories about Grandpa Hank to visitors. The cabin had been renovated, insulated, modernized, made livable year-round. Cara lived there full-time now, having sold her belongings in Denver and committed to mountain life. It was isolated, yes, cold in winter, remote, demanding, but it was home in a way Denver never had been. She'd reconnected with her mother. Finally, that had been the hardest part of the past 6 months. The conversation where Cara explained what Grandpa Hank had built, what he'd accomplished, what he'd sacrificed. Her mother had cried, had apologized for running away from Silverpoint, for cutting off contact with her father, for never understanding that his stubbornness came from principle rather than pride. They were rebuilding their relationship slowly. Her mother had visited once, had walked through the workshop, had seen the photographs of Grandpa Hank receiving posthumous recognition from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. She stood in front of his memorial, a simple bronze plaque mounted on the workshop wall, and wept. The plaque read, Heinrich Hank Bellmont, 1926 to 2024, innovator, craftsman, teacher. He proved that one person, working with integrity and skill, can accomplish what armies of engineers cannot. His work continues through all who believe craftsmanship matters. Cara's phone buzzed. Sarah Chin calling. Good news, Sarah said without preamble. The Smithsonian wants to do an exhibition on independent inventors. They want to feature your grandfather's tools and innovations as the centerpiece. It would run for 6 months in Washington, and toured other museums. The Smithsonian? The actual Smithsonian. National Museum of American History. They're calling it Innovation Without Permission, Independent Inventors Who Change the World. Your grandfather will be featured alongside people like Benjamin Franklin and the Wright brothers. Cara had to sit down. The Smithsonian. Grandpa Hank's work displayed in the nation's premier museum, recognized as historically significant. What do they need from us? They want to borrow several tools, some prototypes, documentation showing his development process. They'll handle all the logistics, climate control transport, insurance, security. And they want you to speak at the opening reception. Me? I didn't do anything. This was all him. You protected his legacy. You fought corporations that tried to steal his work. You turned down millions to make sure his name was on those patents. You're part of this story, Cara. Own it. After hanging up, Cara walked back into the workshop. It was exactly as Grandpa Hank had left it, preserved down to the smallest detail. But it was also alive now, active. Students used the equipment for projects. Daniel held workshops on traditional machining methods. Engineers came to study the innovations and understand how they worked. This was what Grandpa Hank had wanted. Not a shrine, but a living space where craftsmanship was practiced and honored, where his innovations taught new generations about the value of doing things right. On the main workbench, she'd place the last letter he'd written to her, framed and protected under glass. The key to the workshop opens more than just a door, Cara. It opens possibilities. But only if you're brave enough to walk through. She'd walked through. She'd been brave enough, stubborn enough, principled enough. And on the other side, she found not just her grandfather's legacy, but her own purpose. The construction foreman called out a question about window placement in the new addition. Cara walked over to consult, offering her thoughts on how to maximize natural light while maintaining temperature control. She was learning the language of construction, of engineering, of practical problem solving. Grandpa Hank had been right about her. She did have his stubbornness, his dedication to doing things properly. She convinced herself that making things didn't matter, that art wasn't valuable, that only a steady corporate job counted as success. But standing here in the workshop he'd built, overseeing the expansion of his legacy, teaching students about innovation and integrity, she understood now what he'd been trying to show her. Success wasn't about money or recognition or following a safe path. Success was about doing work that mattered, holding to principles that couldn't be bought, building something that would outlast you. She'd spent 15 years running from that lesson, and in the end, it had taken a sealed workshop and a note saying, for when ready, to bring her back to where she'd always belonged. A car pulled into the clearing. Cara didn't recognize it. A sleek hybrid, expensive, completely wrong from mountain roads. She watched as a young woman in business casual emerged, looking around with obvious uncertainty. "Ms. Bellmont," the woman called. "I'm Emily Zhang. I'm an engineer at Krauss Industries." Cara tensed. She hadn't heard from Thomas Krauss since the settlement 6 months ago. What was one of his engineers doing here? "I'm not interested in any offers from Krauss Industries," Cara said flatly. "I'm not here with an offer. I'm here to quit." Emily walked closer, her expression determined. "I've been working at Krauss for 3 years. I had no idea about what Robert Krauss did to your grandfather until your press conference. When I learned the company was built on stolen work, I started asking questions internally. And Ms. Bellmont, it wasn't just your grandfather. There are patents filed by Krauss Industries over the past 40 years that I can trace back to independent inventors who were never credited." Cara felt ice in her stomach. "How many?" "At least 15 that I can prove. Probably more that I haven't found yet. I documented everything before I left. Internal memos, patent applications, correspondence with the original inventors. And I want to give it all to you. For the Innovation Fund, to help those inventors or their families get the recognition they deserve." "Why would you do that?" "You could be sued for disclosing confidential information. Because I became an engineer to build things, not to profit from theft. Your grandfather's story showed me that integrity matters more than a paycheck." Emily pulled a hard drive from her bag. "This has everything. Encrypted, password protected. All I ask is that you use it to help people who were wrong the way your grandfather was." Cara took the drive carefully. "You're going to face consequences for this. Krauss Industries won't let you walk away with their confidential files without a fight." "I know. That's why I'm also asking if the Innovation Fund might need an engineer. Someone who understands patent law and corporate tactics. Someone who's willing to work for less money if it means fighting for independent inventors." Cara looked at Emily Zhang, young, principled, willing to sacrifice a lucrative career to do what was right, and saw a version of herself, or maybe a version of Grandpa Hank, choosing integrity over security. "We could use someone like you," Cara said. "Let's go inside and talk." As they walked toward the workshop, Cara thought about what Grandpa Hank had written in his journal. "Want proof that I was here, that I mattered, that my life's work wasn't just a lonely old man's obsession." He had that proof now. His innovations were being used in operating rooms and spacecraft and laboratories around the world. His name was on 17 patents. The Smithsonian was planning an exhibition. And independent inventors everywhere were finding the courage to protect their work because he'd shown them it was possible. But more than that, he'd started something bigger than himself. The Innovation Fund was helping others fight the same battles he'd fought. Engineers like Emily were choosing integrity over corporate loyalty. And students were learning that craftsmanship and innovation didn't require corporate approval. Grandpa Hank had spent 45 years alone on this mountain, working in secret, trusting that someday someone would understand what he'd built. He died without seeing that understanding, without knowing that his granddaughter would become the person he'd hoped for. But his work lived on, in the patents that bore his name, in the tools that students learned on, in the fund that protected others from the theft he'd experienced, in the lives he'd changed directly and indirectly, through nothing more than stubborn refusal to compromise his principles. Cara unlocked the workshop door and held it open for Emily. "Welcome to Bellmont Precision Systems. I think you're going to fit in perfectly here." Inside, the afternoon sun streamed to the tall windows, illuminating machines that Grandpa Hank had built with his own hands. Tools that would continue teaching, inspiring, proving that one person with skill and determination could change the world. The door stood open now. The secrets were public. The isolation was over. But the work, the real work of honoring craftsmanship and protecting innovation and proving that integrity mattered, that work was just beginning. And Cara was ready.